Chapter 426. A delicate but incomparably heavy domain directly enveloped Li Tianlan. Jiang Qinsong's smile became even more obvious. This was the strongest forbidden move in the 30-meter mortal world. Not to mention that Li Tianlan had not broken through the invincible realm. Even if he really entered the invincible realm, it would be impossible for him to break this domain in a short time before he stabilized his realm. Everything seemed easy, but at the same time, it was not. Facing a young expert with the combat capability of the invincible realm, a top expert of the half-step invincible realm. The two invincible realm experts actually launched a sneak attack. This was indeed ungentlemanly. But as long as he succeeded, as long as it was effective, what did it matter if he was ungentlemanly? He had lost his demeanor today, but getting Li Tianlan was tantamount to getting the Samsara Palace. He even had the possibility to enter Zhongzhou State. The Jiang family of South America had 3 invincible realm experts. Before the tribulation, the only invincible realm killer in the dark world, Wuxia Xianxia, died in Li Tianlan's hands. Jiang Qinyan, the second master of the Jiang family of South America, known as the Black Hand, also died in Li Tianlan's hands. Right now, Li Tianlan would die in Jiang Qinsong's hands. How perfect was this karma? Ha! Jiang Qinsong finally laughed out loud. His laughter was vicious and cold. However, just as his laughter rang out, it suddenly froze on the spot. In his sight, Li Tianlan, who was trapped in the domain, raised his hands. With his current strength, he really couldn't break this cage. But just because he couldn't break it didn't mean that other things couldn't. Li Tianlan's hand lit up with silver light. The silver light instantly became incomparably dazzling. The silver bracelet on Li Tianlan's wrist began to stretch and elongate. In the blink of an eye, a silver sniper rifle more than 2 meters long appeared in Li Tianlan's hand. The silver sniper was ostentatious and domineering, but the patterns on the body of the gun appeared elegant and ruthless. Li Tianlan held the silver sniper in his hand, and his momentum soared to the sky in an instant. He raised the muzzle and aimed it at Jiang Qinsong, who was outside the domain. Jiang Qinsong's expression changed drastically. This silver spear was so familiar to him, yet so strange. This was a murderous weapon belonging to the Jiang family of South America. This was the legend of Qin, yet not the legend of Qin. This spear is called Falling Stars. Li Tianlan smiled and raised the muzzle. I'll give it to Mr. Jiang today. Any murderous weapon in the dark world was enough to deter an invincible realm expert. Especially in the hands of a person with the combat capability of the invincible realm like Li Tianlan, it was a completely different concept from that of an ordinary thundershocking realm expert or even an ordinary half-step invincible realm expert. Even though Jiang Qinsong was known for his defense, he did not dare to take a blow from a murderous weapon head-on. Therefore, the moment Falling Stars was raised, he no longer cared about maintaining his domain. He turned around and ran. The moment the domain loosened, boundless sword energy surged on Li Tianlan, directly shattering the domain that Jiang Qinsong gave up maintaining. Falling Star turned into a silver sword. Li Tianlan carried Shenker in one hand and the sword in the other, laughing wildly as he rushed out of the domain. His figure flickered and appeared in front of the castle gate in the shortest time possible. The Rekvia castle was quiet. No one looked at Shenker, who was in Li Tianlan's hand. No one cared about Li Tianlan. Jiang Qinsong turned back and caught up with them with a gloomy face. He looked at Li Tianlan and was silent for a long time. The moment Li Tianlan tore the domain with his sword intent, he realized that he had been fooled by this boy. Jiang Qinyan never denied his value. In particular, the Jiang family of South America now had a huge cause and effect with Li Tianlan. A blow from a murderous weapon was precious enough, but if Li Tianlan could kill him or even seriously injure him in one blow, it was worth it. Li Tianlan finally chose to use sword intent to smash the cage of desperation. This could only mean one thing. That falling star was most likely a modified version of the legend of Qin. Right now, it hadn't fully charged up yet, so it couldn't fire. But there was nothing to be angry about. A murderous weapon that could not fire was beside Li Tianlan. This was definitely a good thing for him. It was even the best thing. Black Ghost appeared beside Jiang Qinsong. A pitch-black knife and a pitch-black person. He stood there, and his whole person exuded a deep and obscure darkness and killing intent, like a shadow shrouded in darkness beside Jiang Qinsong. Darkness was Black Ghost's domain. The invincible realm expert who was piled up by the Jiang family of South America by the cruelest means was naturally the most special one. Black Ghost's domain had no control effect. It was just that in his domain, his speed and strength would be multiplied, and his defense would be infinitely weakened. Jiang Qinsong once tested Black Ghost's full blow. In the dark domain, Black Ghost's speed and strength broke out at the same time. Although it was not as good as the wind and thunder veins in terms of lethality, it was equivalent to slightly surpassing the wind vein in terms of pure speed. This was enough to show how terrifying Black Ghost in the dark domain was. Jiang Qinsong's heart was completely settled. He reached out to Li Tianlan and pointed to the silver sword blade in Li Tianlan's hand. "Give it to me." His tone was flat. Because of self-confidence, because everything was under control, so it was flat. Li Tianlan's voice was equally stable and calm, almost the same as Jiang Qinsong's. "You want it?" He smiled and raised Falling Star in his hand. "Come and get it yourself." Jiang Qinsong frowned slightly and glanced at Schenker, who was held in Li Tianlan's hand. His eyes were meaningful. This was the castle of the Rekvia family. "You were the patriarch of the Rekvia family. I was your ally. You were in the hands of the enemy. Was there a need to say what to do?" Schenker didn't need Jiang Qinsong to say anything at all. Since he saw Jiang Qinsong, with endless hope igniting in his heart, he stopped struggling and roared at the top of his lungs, "Open the door. I'm Schenker, your patriarch. Everyone come out and kill Li Tianlan. Don't worry about me. Kill him. This is an order." Cough. He roared so hard that his face turned red, and he coughed violently. Li Tianlan ignored Schenker's yelling and just looked at Jiang Qinsong mockingly. The silent castle of Rekvia also ignored Schenker's yelling. It was silent. Schenker said that he didn't need to worry about him. The Rekvia family really didn't care about him. What was going on? Schenker's mind went blank for a moment. Even though he was held in Li Tianlan's hand, the authority of the patriarch still made him furious. "Open the door." "Bastard, Marajev, what are you doing?" Marajev was the butler of the Rekvia family. At the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, he stayed in the Rekvia family after retiring from the Polar Ground Alliance. It had been nearly 15 years since then, and he was Schenker's absolute confidant. Seeming to feel Schenker's rage, the deep gate of the castle slowly opened. Before Schenker had time to breathe a sigh of relief, a black object suddenly flew out of it and landed right in front of Schenker. Schenker opened his mouth and seemed to want to scold something, but when he saw the thing in front of him, he suddenly lost all his voice. In his line of sight was a human head. It was a human head that had died with endless anger, anxiety, and surprise. The head of Marajev's butler. This, Schenker's brain went blank. He was sluggish for a while before he screamed, "Jessica! Where's Jessica? What's going on?" Jessica was his woman, equivalent to half the hostess of this castle. She was also a thunder-shocking realm expert who retired from the Polar Ground Alliance. She had an enchanting figure that Schenker could play with for a few years without getting tired of, and she could also provide protection for him at critical moments. Whoosh, the object cut through the air. Jessica's beautiful and enchanting head flew over and landed in front of Schenker. Schenker seemed to have lost all his strength. His face was ashen, and he didn't speak for a long time. Li Tianlan loosened his hand and threw him to the ground. Schenker sat on the ground and looked at the head in front of him dully, like a statue without the slightest vitality. Jiang Qinsong's heart sank and kept sinking. It was not until this moment that he vaguely understood what Li Tianlan meant by, "my Rekvia." This sentence did not mean that Rekvia was about to be his. But when Schenker was still alive, Rekvia seemed to have changed owners. Tostel. Shankar suddenly stood up. His voice was a little trembling, and he called the last name that could be counted on, Tostel. I'm here, dear brother. Just when Shankar was about to despair, there was no more head flying out of the castle, but a voice that made him ecstatic and then extremely angry came. A tall, strong and majestic figure walked out of the gate of the castle. Behind him were two indistinct figures from the east. Sai City. Cool breeze and drifting cloud. Shankar's face changed, and he stared at his biological brother. For a while, he couldn't say a word. Do you like it? Tostel pointed to the two heads beside Shankar. This is my gift to you. Tostel. The defense general of Wulan State. Unlike the national defense of Jianghu State, the national defense of Wulan State was a department with real power. It could mobilize most of the army of Wulan State and had great power. Jiang Qinsong's heart was still sinking, but there was a touch of understanding in his eyes. When the Reki City army indiscriminately covered the entire military region with firepower, he vaguely guessed that Jianghu State or Samsara Palace had raised a big fish in Wulan State. But now it seemed that this big fish was not only raised in Wulan State, but also in the Rekvia family. Li Tianlan looked at cool breeze and drifting cloud. The two top assassins of Jianghu State nodded at the same time. Li Tianlan was relieved. He was chasing Shankar to control Jiang Qinsong's trajectory of activities, and at the same time, to attract the expert team from the headquarters of the Rekvia family. In order to rescue the patriarch, the experts of the Rekvia family rushed out of the castle in batches. With the constant emptiness of the headquarters of the castle, and Tostel acting as an insider, the two top assassins sneaked into the castle. With the cooperation of Tostel, they had now completely controlled the headquarters of the Rekvia family. On this trip to Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan had too many chips in his hands. Tostel was one of the most important chips, which belonged to the Samsara Palace. Tostel. Do you know what you are doing? Did you turn to the Samsara Palace? You will become the sinner of the family, you will bring the Rekvia family to hell, you will. Enough. Tostel directly interrupted Shankar's last roar. I'm very sober. He looked at his brother and said calmly, but you don't seem to know what you are doing. The Polar Ground Alliance collapsed. If I don't take action this time, you will turn to the Jiang family of South America, and the entire Rekvia family will be annexed by the Jiang family of South America. As for me, I just cooperate with the Samsara Palace. Everyone knew that the headquarters of the Samsara Palace had been destroyed. They knew that the master of Samsara Palace died under the sword of Wang Tianzong. Under such circumstances, it was naturally safer to cooperate with the Samsara Palace than with the Jiang family of South America. Rekvia's cooperation partner did not necessarily have to be the Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan was their main goal. Behind Li Tianlan was Jianghu State and Samsara. The most important thing was that he was destined not to stay in Eastern Europe for a long time. If he wanted to occupy the interests of Eastern Europe, he could only find an ally. Tostel thought he was the best ally. Of course, the so-called fair cooperation also meant that both sides had the right to change their positions. Tostel said that what he wanted was the best result. But if there was an accident, such as they did this, but Jiang Qinsong and Black Ghost killed Li Tianlan, Tostel would also give up Li Tianlan without hesitation and choose to turn to the Jiang family of South America. Before that, he needed to kill someone first. Tostel took out a pistol and aimed at Shankar, at his own brother. As long as Shankar died. No matter whether Li Tianlan and Jiang Qinsong won or lost, they could only choose to cooperate with him. He and Rekvia would be safe. Bang! A gunshot rang out. Shankar did not fall. An illusory sword intent rotated and shredded the bullet, bringing out a spark. Tostel suddenly turned his head and looked at Li Tianlan. Your Highness, Shankar must die. This is the condition of our cooperation. Of course. Li Tianlan laughed. But not now. Now he is still useful to be alive. Tostel's face was cloudy and uncertain. Mr. Tostel. Jiang Qinsong suddenly said, I'll help you kill Shankar. how about you and I join forces to kill Li Tianlan? Li Tianlan sneered and looked down at his watch without saying a word. Tostel noticed his movement and felt a little cold in his heart. He really wanted Xianxia to die. But he was unwilling to give up the prospect of cooperation with Li Tianlan. If he chose the Jiang family of South America, Rekvia was destined to be annexed. Choosing Li Tianlan was tantamount to choosing Jianghu state. In this way, Rekvia would retain some full autonomy. And the most important thing was that Jiang Qiansong could not kill Xianxia under Li Tianlan's eyes now. Even if Xianxia died, he and the Jiang family of South America might not be able to kill Li Tianlan. Tostel shook his head. I'm sorry. He raised his hand. Under the gloomy sky, the silent castle suddenly lit up with a dazzling light. In the messy footsteps, groups of elites of the Rekvia family appeared in every corner of the castle, aiming at Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost with live ammunition. Li Tianlan's figure slowly rose into the air and landed at the top of the castle. On his left and right sides were cool breeze and drifting cloud. Below were countless elites of Rekvia. Jiang Qiansong's face became completely dignified. At this moment, Jiang Qiansong finally understood the seriousness of the matter. Li Tianlan caused great changes in Wulan state. Xianxia, on the other hand, brought this upheaval to the international stage in a huge way. Now all the international pressure was in Reki City. Jianghu state was silent. Li Tianlan had no way back. But at this time, the Jiang family of South America also had no way back. The key was the attitude of the Rekvia family. If he killed Li Tianlan, no matter who was in charge of the Rekvia family, they would have to cooperate with the Jiang family of South America. If Li Tianlan killed Jiang Qiansong, he would also get the support of the Rekvia family. Rekvia, on the other hand, had the power to change the position of Wulan state. If this was a war, if Li Tianlan failed, the cooperation between the Jiang family of South America and Rekvia, with international pressure, even if they could not kill Li Tianlan, it was enough to make Li Tianlan have no foothold in the dark world, and the Li family would completely disappear. But if Jiang Qiansong failed, winner takes all. If Li Tianlan cooperated with the Rekvia family, the Jiang family of South America would stand in the position of the loser and bear all the international pressure and conquests after the great change in Wulan state. Wulan state had declared Jianghu state a hostile country. But after all, no real war broke out. As long as Rekvia changed its attitude, Wulan state could explain that this was a misunderstanding, restore its relationship with Jianghu state, and then list the Jiang family of South America as a target. It was unstable. This was the norm in the dark world. Jiang Qiansong stood in front of the castle and was silent for a long time. He was not sure what would happen if he rushed into the castle at this time and fought with Li Tianlan, the Snowdance Corps, and the Rekvia family. But he knew that if he turned around and left at this time, Li Tianlan would not even pay attention to him. He just wanted to kill Jiang Qinyan. He wanted to force the Jiang family of South America to withdraw from the feast in Eastern Europe, instead of fighting to the death with Jiang Qiansong. As long as Jiang Qiansong retreated without fighting, under the overwhelming international pressure, the Jiang family of South America would suffer absolutely heavy losses, not to mention gaining a foothold in Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan had now taken the initiative and controlled Rekvia. If Jiang Qiansong could not break the deadlock, he could only accept failure. So Li Tianlan now hoped that Jiang Qiansong could retreat. But Jiang Qiansong could never retreat. Jiang Qiansong stood quietly, looking at the mountains and the castle in front of him. The world seemed to shrink infinitely in front of him, turning into a long and narrow spider silk. Below the spider silk was a cliff. He stood on the spider silk, swaying, but he had to make a choice. This was where Li Tianlan had just stood. Li Tianlan walked over on the spider silk. Jiang Qiansong also had to move forward. Taking a step forward might not be heaven, but taking a step back would definitely be hell. Jiang Qiansong laughed. Ghosty. He snorted. Master. Black Ghost lowered his head. Follow me. Jiang Qinsong said and took a step forward. Boom! The entire castle shook violently. The surrounding mountains seemed to shake fiercely. The domain of the 30-meter mortal world began to extend in front of the castle. The black knife light filled the domain and became enough to tear everything apart. In the loud bang, the gate of the entire castle was completely shattered in a moment in the black knife light. Chapter 427. From the perspective of the distance between Im and Wulan State, the distance of hundreds of kilometers between the two countries was not far. But it was not easy to plan the route of the march. A distance of hundreds of kilometers could not even leave a province in Jianghu State. But in Eastern Europe, where there were many small countries, from Im to Wulan State, they had to pass through two small countries with an area of about 20,000 square kilometers. Oga State. Ross State. No matter how they went, from Im to Wulan State, they had to pass through the borders of these two countries. Wulan State, Oga State, and Ross State. Plus Bayou State and Rosen State behind Wulan State. These were the 5 Eastern European countries that were very famous in the hearts of the military of Jianghu State. The reason why this area with 5 countries was so famous was that it was previously a place that the Arctic Ocean Command of Jianghu State could not reach at all. There were only 6 countries in Eastern Europe that did not have troops stationed in Jianghu State. The 5 countries occupied 5 of them. The other one was Snow Country, the largest country in the world. The mighty motorcade moved forward on the highway. All the way from the capital of Im, the rapid march without the slightest relaxation made the 5,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps move at the fastest speed. In the huge truck compartment that had been modified as a temporary headquarters, Major General Li Zhonghu, the commander of the 1st Division of the Snowdance Corps, looked at the electronic map on the screen expressionlessly, and his eyebrows were full of perseverance. After all, this full-speed march was different from the one more than 20 years ago. More than 20 years ago, the Arctic Ocean Command did not exist. The Highnesses of the Li family came to Eastern Europe with the initially established Border Control Corps. They fought their way out in a deadlock and hostility. That was how the Arctic Ocean Command came into being. Li Zhonghu was a veteran who had participated in that pioneering campaign. So when he thought of the grim situation and bloody fighting in those days, compared with the present, everything was like a repeat of the past. Li Zhonghu was in a trance. At that time, the 5 Eastern European countries with Wulan State as the core had also declared war on Jianghu State. At that time, the Li family, which supported the overall situation of Jianghu State, responded very simply. Fireman, the first vice-marshal of the Border Control Corps, led 600 elites to fight directly. In a day and a night, 600 elites directly penetrated the obstruction of Oga State and Ross State, flattened the defense of Wulan State, and headed straight for Reki City. In that turbulent era, Snow Country finally contacted many powerful countries in Western Europe, and several superpowers joined forces to force the Li family to retreat. The Li family withdrew from the 5 Eastern European countries, but the foundation of the Arctic Ocean Command was completely stabilized with the Li family's compromise. Time passed quietly for more than 20 years, until today. Li Tianlan arrived in Eastern Europe with the Snowdance Corps. The first order he gave the Snowdance Corps was to march into Reki City. The same family. There were 3 princes before and after him. Now, the youngest highness seemed to be doing what the 2 former highnesses of the Li family had failed to do. Li Zhonghu suddenly smiled. He was one of the first veterans of the Border Control Corps and one of the elites who came to Eastern Europe with the 2 highnesses of the Li family. However, at that time, he was still very young and his realm was low, far from being qualified to enter the Li family. Today, 20 years later, he was at his peak, and he followed the youngest highness of the Li family to Eastern Europe again, taking the same path that the Li family had taken. In this situation, Li Zhonghu's heart gradually became subtle and complicated. The truck's compartment was very large. The huge screen was playing the marching route of the Snowdance Corps at this time. The 5,000 elites were divided into 2 batches, with 3,000 people in the front and sprinting lightly. The 2,000 people in the back moved slower and carried heavy weapons. At this time, after a few hours of marching, the two groups of people had gradually pulled apart a distance that was not dangerous but could no longer be regarded as absolutely safe. Li Zonghu looked at the screen in front of him. All the high-level officials of this operation in the carriage also looked at the screen. The red line on the screen, which represented their marching route, passed through Im, Ra State, Oga State, and went directly to Reki City, the capital of Wulan State. Shockingly, it was an almost perfectly straight and extremely swift marching route. The Arctic Ocean Command fully cooperated. At 9:00 in the morning, the 5,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps left the border of Im. The request of the Snowdance Corps to borrow the road to march to Ra State was directly rejected. At 9:15 in the morning, the first batch of 3,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps set foot directly on the territory of Ra State. High-powered military trucks ran at full speed. At 11:00 in the afternoon, the Snowdance Corps, which had crossed the border of Ra State, passed by the capital of Ra State. At the closest time, the distance between the two sides was less than 50 kilometers. The Snowdance Corps went all the way north. Ra State, which had declared Jianghu State as a hostile country, had been silent about such a blatant and even aggressive march of Jianghu State. At 1:10 in the afternoon, the first 3,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps left the border of Ra State in silence. In the continuous rapid march, neither Ra State nor the Snowdance Corps let go of a single shot. They let the enemy's armed forces pass through. It was an absolute shame. But for the Snowdance Corps, it was a great honor. The morale of the 3,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps was rising. At 1:25 in the afternoon, the 3,000 elites entered the border of Oga State one after another. Oga State sent out the most elite reconnaissance corps to closely monitor the border. As soon as the Snowdance Corps entered the border of Oga State, the commander of the reconnaissance corps had already reported the situation to the high-level officials of Oga State, and then got an order: pay close attention. The Snowdance Corps crossed the border of Oga State without hesitation and went all the way deep. The reconnaissance corps kept retreating on the way of the Snowdance Corps. More and more troops of Oga State were coming, but they could only retreat without the order to start the war. The Snowdance Corps passed by Flying Snow City. Oga State, pay close attention. The Snowdance Corps passed by Blue Water State. Oga State, pay close attention. The Snowdance Corps passed by the rainforest area. Oga State, pay close attention. The Snowdance Corps approached the capital. The Snowdance Corps passed by the capital. Oga State, withdraw troops. The army of Oga State, which was full of impatience and resentment, followed the Snowdance Corps through half of the country without stopping. Finally, because of the order, they endured the conflict of cursing and watched the Snowdance Corps leave the capital of Oga State. Ra State was a disgrace. Oga State was also a disgrace. At 3:30 in the afternoon, the convoy of the vanguard of the Snowdance Corps added gasoline, confirmed the distance of the heavy armored troops behind, and continued to march. Li Zonghu, who had been silent for a long time in the carriage, finally said, "Everyone, we will officially enter Wulan State in about half an hour. Who can tell me how long it will take us to get to Reki City?" In the carriage, the high-level officials of this operation were all silent for a while. They passed through Ra State and Oga State without any conflict. The morale of the 3,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps had reached its peak. But only the real high-level officials understood that this was not a good thing. The silence of Ra State and Oga State was not only a shame, but also a representation of their pragmatic style. They had declared war on Jianghu State and officially listed Jianghu State as a hostile country. They could not be so cowardly. But the two countries did not react at all and let them cross the border. The biggest possibility was that they wanted to gather all their forces and fight to the death with the 5,000 people of the Snowdance Corps. They wanted to accomplish the task at one stroke. So the road ahead was doomed to not be peaceful. Ahead, they were very likely to meet the coalition forces of Ra State, Oga State, and Wulan State. Although the other party mobilized the troops in a hurry, who could tell how many people there would be? They only had 5,000. The other party might have 10,000, 20,000, or even more. From this position, it would take them more than 3 hours to leave the border of Oga State and reach Reki City at full speed with the speed of the truck. That was, under normal circumstances, they would arrive at Reki City at about 7 o'clock. But there was bound to be no normal situation ahead. When Li Zonghu asked them when they could arrive at Reki City, he was undoubtedly asking everyone how long their war against the coalition forces of the three countries would last. Hasn't the information from the front come yet? Sun Mengran, the deputy commander of the 1st Division of the Snowdance Corps, asked. In the Border Control Corps, Sun Mengran's rank and position were the same as Li Zonghu's. But at this time, he became Li Zonghu's main deputy. Of course, his military rank was still the same as Li Zonghu's. I'm not sure. Li Zonghu shook his head and said, the other party is obviously prepared. Although it's a little hasty, there was news 10 minutes ago that there were traces of a large number of military personnel on the border of Wulan State. But at present, no military flags of Oga State and Ra State have been found. But according to the observation of our investigators, there are at least 12,000 troops on the border of Oga State. Li Zonghu paused and didn't go on. Sun Mengran had already understood the meaning of this sentence. Oga State and Wulan State had a very close relationship. It could be said that they had always advanced and retreated together. Oga State was definitely not the object of Wulan State's defense. On the border of the two countries, it was absolutely impossible for Wulan State to station more than 10,000 troops. 2,000 was already the limit. Now, in such a short time, the other party had gathered at least 12,000 troops. This could only be the coalition forces of the three countries. And 12,000 people was just a conservative estimate. It doesn't sound like a lot. Sun Mengran thought for a moment and said calmly. Generally, what's your limit? A voice suddenly sounded. A young man in his 30s stood up in the corner of the carriage. The young man's appearance was ordinary, and his tone was a little dull, so his expression was particularly serious when he asked. The young man obviously did not belong to the Snowdance Corps. Including the few people around him, they all had a completely different temperament from the high-level members of the Snowdance Corps. That temperament was not noble or reserved, but at first glance, they did not look like professional soldiers. The young man held a long silver spear in his hand, and his eyes were solemn. Li Zonghu glanced at him, subconsciously straightened up, and raised his arm to salute the young man slightly. The young man raised his hand to return the salute. Although he was young, the lieutenant general epaulet on his shoulder was genuine. It depends on the level of the other party's elites. Li Zonghu explained seriously, if it's the strongest elites of the three countries, 45,000 people will probably be our limit if we want to break through the defense of the other party and reach Reki City with 3,000 people and still be able to maintain a certain combat capability. The strongest elites of the three countries. Li Zonghu's words were extremely arrogant. They only had 3,000 people against 45,000 people, which was equivalent to a battle-loss ratio of 1:15. Li Zonghu even asked these people to have a certain combat capability, which meant that the battle-loss ratio would be higher. What about ordinary people? The young lieutenant general asked. 60,000 people. Li Zonghu said, if we don't consider their weapons. The young man nodded. He thought for a moment and said, we can do it. Li Zonghu froze and subconsciously shifted his gaze. His gaze fell on a middle-aged man beside the young man. The middle-aged man sat silently in the corner and didn't say a word from beginning to end. He just lowered his head and slowly wiped the ridiculously large bow in his hand. But no one dared to ignore his existence. This was the only general of the special warfare system of Jianghu State among all the people present. Seeing Li Zonghu's gaze, he nodded and said in a simple tone, 1 arrow. That's enough. Li Zonghu solemnly saluted. Thank you, General. The middle-aged general nodded. Li Zonghu took a deep breath and said, since the two generals are willing to take action, then we expect, not expected. A clear voice suddenly sounded, like the spray of water flowing through a barren desert, clear and cold. It's a must. Uncle Li, we must arrive in Reki City before 8 o'clock. A young woman stood up beside the middle-aged general and the young lieutenant general. She had no makeup on, but she was extremely beautiful and pure. She wore a red dress that was out of place with the surroundings. Her white hand held an ancient sword with a scabbard full of cracks. Her eyes were firm and persistent. "Young madam is right." The young lieutenant general smiled and said, "We must arrive in Reki City before 8 o'clock. The young woman's face became ruddy, and she glanced at the lieutenant general with her clear eyes. There was a soft smile on the lieutenant general's dull face, and he gave her a thumbs up. "I'm willing to be the sharp knife of these 3,000 people and walk in front." The woman whispered, "This should be helpful to Uncle Li." "No." Li Zonghu was shocked and said without hesitation, "First miss, you, no." He didn't know what to say, but insisted, "Absolutely not. Father will agree." The woman whispered, "This is the family style of the Dongxing clan. I know the marshal will agree." Li Zonghu said with a wry smile, "But His Highness won't agree." "I won't agree. Everyone here won't agree." "But," the woman frowned. "One arrow is not enough. Then let's add another strike." A gentle and casual voice suddenly sounded. A young man who seemed to have no sense of existence stood up and said with a smile, "That's enough." Li Zonghu glanced at him and frowned. He didn't know this young man, but he followed the first miss into the car and said that he was a friend of His Highness, so he couldn't say anything. But at this time, everyone was staring at the young man who suddenly stood up. The young man smiled. He stretched and said with a smile, "What's wrong? Don't you believe me?" "I believe you." The middle-aged general, who had been silently wiping the giant bow in his hand, suddenly said. He raised his head and looked at the somewhat lazy young man, with undisguised fear and appreciation in his eyes. He didn't know this young man, but he could clearly feel the terrifying aura of the other party, which was like a surging river. And the other party was so young. The general could even be sure that in today's Jianghu state, after Wang Xingxiao and Jiang Shangyu's realm fell, even Gu Hanshan's realm was still there. But in the younger generation, except for Li Tianlan, the young man in front of him was definitely the strongest, and even the strongest. Li Tianlan was the heavenly son. He was the top young heavenly son. His arrow. His sword. Chapter 428. The mighty motorcade stopped less than 15 kilometers from the border of Wulan State. Oga Nation was mountainous. The border between Oga and Ulan was mostly an undulating mountain range with steep slopes. Even the most powerful truck could not pass through. Only the most advanced main battle tanks could barely pass through. The 3,000 elites at the front of the Snowdance Corps abandoned the heavy firepower corps. At the same time, it meant that everyone had to cross this mountain range on foot. Li Zonghu ordered to abandon the car. All the higher-ups walked out of the temporary command center. All the soldiers arranged their formations in silence, forming one line after another. In the wilderness, the silent and oppressive atmosphere was almost suffocating. Interweaving, formation, arranging weapons, everything proceeded in silence. Li Zonghu, Sun Mengran, and several other senior officers of the Border Control Corps had long been accustomed to it. These were the direct troops who had been with them for several years, and they were already very familiar with each other. But in addition, a group of officers of the Special Warfare System of Jianghu State, who were originally in the plan but were arranged to meet by chance for various reasons, looked more and more solemn. This group of people was very small in the list of troops, adding up to less than 20 people, but the lineup was incomparably luxurious. Terracotta Army of Jianghu State. General of the Ninth Heaven, one of the four spirits of Jianghu State, held a longbow. His code name was Vermilion Bird. Li Wangsheng, Lieutenant General of 9 Regions, one of the four spirits of Jianghu State, held a silver spear and codenamed Black Tortoise. The two groups of terracotta soldiers had a total of 14 people. Dongxing Rushi, the daughter of the Dongxing clan and the genius disciple of Jade Pool, was holding an ancient sword and wearing a red dress. The eldest disciple of Jade Lake, Su Chu, was dressed in a military uniform and looked majestic. Finally, It was the young man who was going to attack together with General of the Nine Heavens Lin Yuxian, the former heir of the Lin clan, was a special figure who was not from Zhongzhou state but stood in Li Tianlan's camp. This was a powerful force that was now in the Snowdance Corps but had no connection with the Snowdance Corps on the surface. Everyone watched the Snowdance Corps silently reorganize the army. Dongqing Rushi seemed to have seen this before. Her beautiful face was calm. But apart from her, everyone else's expression gradually changed. This is not the Border Control Corps. Yi suddenly spoke and broke the silence. The Snowdance Corps was a special warfare corps composed of 15,000 elites of the Border Control Corps. But the 3,000 people in front of him, it was definitely not the Border Control Corps. It was an indescribable feeling. Every elite troop had a soul and an unshakable spirit. Only troops with souls could be called elites. Yi had seen the elite troops of Zhongzhou state. The Border Control Corps was known as the most elite super-large comprehensive corps in Zhongzhou state. Their quality was naturally the best in Zhongzhou state. But even the strongest corps in Zhongzhou state could never reach this level. 5 minutes. The 3,000 soldiers stood in their formation in silence. The 3,000 elites in the truck, who had been quiet all this while, seemed to have completely erupted in an instant. Cold, iron-blooded, unswerving, silent, yet with an indescribable majesty and an extreme desire to attack. The morale of the entire army was rising. However, his aura, which was enough to make the world's battle prowess, was constantly being restrained, becoming calm and collected. As far as the eye could see, the 3,000 elites standing in a neat formation were like a pack of disciplined wolves. At the same time, it was like a wildfire that could engulf everything at any time. They couldn't be the elites of the Border Control Corps. Yi was almost sure that if there were nearly 600,000 such elites in the Border Control Corps, no, with only 100,000 such elites, Zhongzhou state could completely sweep away the turbulent Southeast Asia in the shortest time, and even sweep away all the troops of all countries in the world. To describe the 3,000 people in front of him as elites was simply an insult to them. Every elite troop had a military soul. And the 3,000 people standing here were the military soul. There were not many troops of this level, even in the heyday of the Li family, the Wang family of Beihai, or Zhongzhou state. He subconsciously held the longbow in his hand. The aura of the 3,000 people standing together had vaguely integrated into one, with a kind of power that even he was extremely afraid of. Among the 4 spirits of Zhongzhou state, except for Li Wangsheng, who was still inexperienced and was still at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, the other 3 were the top superiors of the half-step invincible realm. As a general of 9th heaven, he had always been extremely confident in his strength. But at this time, facing such a military soul, he felt that he couldn't resist it even if only 1,000 people were needed, not 3,000. This is definitely not the Border Control Corps. His voice was hoarse, and he slowly repeated. This is the Border Control Corps. Li Zonghu smiled. His smile was restrained and wild, but there was a kind of excitement in his eyes that couldn't be concealed. The strongest corps in Zhongzhou state? Li Wangxing murmured to himself thoughtfully. Lin Yuxian didn't speak, just watching all this in silence. The strength of these 3,000 elites was not very strong, but the aura made him vaguely see the shadow of Xianyuan's sword, the strongest troop of the Lin clan. Of course, in terms of strength, they might not be comparable to Xianyuan's sword. But there were only 300 Xianyuan sword troops. But there were already 3,000 of them here in front of him. What did this mean? There was a sudden flash of light in the distant sky. The light rose all the way, crossed the top of the mountain, and radiated brilliance in the sky. There was an orange brilliance. Li Zonghu frowned slightly and narrowed his eyes. This was the signal released by the scouts ahead. The situation needed to release the signal, which meant that the scouts had encountered danger and were even surrounded. The orange signal meant difficulty, which meant that the number of enemies exceeded at least 30,000 people. The signal flashed high in the sky. The 3,000 elites raised their heads at the same time and looked at the signal in the sky. This was a troop without any heavy firepower configuration. They gave up firepower and got the fastest speed. The signal flashed in front of the troops without heavy firepower configuration. In the square formation of 3,000 people, the iron-blooded and cold momentum was rising. Li Zonghu walked to the front of the team, stretched out his hand, and pointed to the mountains ahead. His voice was very light, but it echoed in the audience, with incomparable tranquility and dominance. Step over it. After stepping over the mountain in front of them, it was their battlefield. The battlefield of soldiers. 3,000 people moved forward at the same time. In the orderly footsteps that made people's faces change, the 3,000 people walked lightly and rushed straight to the hillside ahead. The whole formation suddenly seemed to break up, but the connection between them became more and more subtle. They were like countless individuals, like a whole that cooperated with each other, and like a complete army. Full speed charge. Lin Yuxian opened his mouth wide. He looked helplessly at Li Zonghu leading people all the way forward and didn't know what to say. Didn't he open the way with a sword? What kind of operation was this? He seemed to be a little helpless and lost in thought. Every time there is a war in the Border Control Corps, the officers are in front, and the soldiers are behind. Even if they retreat, the soldiers retreat first, and the officers stay behind. Dongxing Rushi said softly, they may need your sword and arrow, but it will always be the officers of the Border Control Corps who rush to the front. This is the military rule of the Border Control Corps. Those who violate it will be killed. There have been countless sacrifices in the Border Control Corps over the past 20 years, but no officer has ever violated this military rule. Dongxing Rushi's voice was ethereal and agitated. Not one. Lin Yuxian took a deep breath and suddenly turned around. In the footsteps that covered the mountains and resounded through the world, the blood seemed to burn silently and began to boil. Dongxing Rushi rushed forward. Lin Yuxian and Su Chu followed closely. 9 Heavens General, 9 Provinces Lieutenant General, 2 groups of terracotta soldiers moved forward at the same time. They stepped over the mountains. They set foot on the top of the mountain. The boundary monument of Oga State became extremely small. A dense army appeared in his line of sight. The army of Ross State. The army of Oga State. The army of Wulan State. Countless heavy weapons were urgently set up on the national border of Wulan State. A large number of troops looked at each other across the huge gullies between the mountains. If they wanted to break through the blockade of the enemy coalition from here, they had to go down the mountain first and then charge toward the mountain that belonged to Wulan State. From the bottom up. In terms of terrain, the Snowdance Corps was at an absolute disadvantage. 3,000 people began to slowly descend the mountain. From the top of the mountain to the foot. The coalition forces stood on the mountain. The Snowdance Corps watched from the foot of the mountain. From the perspective of looking up, the coalition forces of the 3 countries were dense, like a dark cloud that covered the sky, which was daunting. Go back, people of Jianghu State. Oga State and Wulan State are not places you should come to. A loud and clear voice rumbled down from the top of the mountain with an imposing aura. Go back. Go back. Go back. Go back. Go back. The coalition forces of at least 30,000 people on the mountain roared at the same time, and their momentum shook the world. Li Zonghu stood at the forefront. Beside him was Major General Sun Mengran, the deputy division commander. Li Zonghu pursed his lips slightly and looked up. On the top of the mountain in his sight, a general of Wulan State looked down at Li Zonghu. The evening sun gradually set. The light shrouded the mountains. In the faint sunlight, Li Zonghu chuckled. The gale in the mountains was whistling up and down. All the eyes of the coalition forces of the 3 countries fell on Li Zonghu. At that moment, the mountain, the grass, the setting sun, and the ominous blades all gathered on Li Zonghu. The mighty orange setting sun glowed. The line rushed over from behind him with the momentum of devouring heaven and earth, and then merged with him. Li Zonghu stretched out his hand and shook it. A very thick metal pipe fell from his cuff. The metal pipe stretched in his hand, grew longer, and finally became a long pole nearly 10 meters high. Li Zonghu held the long pole and threw it violently. In an instant, a scarlet flag stretched out from the top of the long pole. The wind howled. The flag suddenly fluttered in the wind. There were only 2 scarlet flags. One was the golden star flag of Jianghu state. On the other side, there was only 1 star on the scarlet flag. That was the private medal of Dongqing Wudi, the executive minister of the army headquarters of Jianghu state, the god of massacre of Jianghu state, and the former commander of the border control corps. Li Zonghu held the flagpole tightly and said calmly, "The marshal is watching us." In the ravine of the valley, the 3,000 elites suddenly became quiet, and even their breathing seemed to gradually disappear. Only Li Zonghu's voice stirred the sky. "His Highness is also watching us." The endless murderous intent that was enough to tear the sky spread among the 3,000 troops, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. The sun gradually set. "From now on," Li Zonghu said slowly, "we are the 1st Division of the Snowdance Corps, code name." His voice resounded in everyone's ears from afar, like a solemn oath. "Thunderbolt." In the back froze for a moment. Everyone froze for a moment. The most elite army in Jianghu state was the Border Control Corps. The most elite army in the Border Control Corps was the Thunderbolt Battalion, which was directly under Dongqing Wudi. However, everyone knew that the Thunderbolt Battalion had been traded to the Wang family of Beihai by the Dongqing clan. Now the 1st Division of the Snowdance Corps was codenamed Thunderbolt. What did that mean? It only meant one fact. The deal with the Wang family of Beihai was not complete. At least part of the Thunderbolt Battalion was still in the hands of the Dongqing clan. Now, it was in Li Tianlan's hands. On the top of the mountain, the bodies of the coalition forces of the 3 countries began to tense up. In the increasingly silent world, Li Zonghu's voice sounded uninterrupted. "Jianghu state is also watching us." He raised the flagpole in his hand, pointed straight ahead, and said calmly, "Rush over with me." The voice was so calm. But the response that followed was completely earth-shattering. In the roar that went straight into the sky, the soldiers gathered like a rushing stream. "Rush over. Rush over. Rush, 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 rush." In the cold mountain wind, the scarlet flag engraved with stars suddenly fluttered wildly at the forefront. Without any hesitation, the 3,000 people charged at full speed, completely ignoring everything. "Charge up. Charge." The sound of gunfire sounded on the mountain, and the strong fire directly rushed down with the smell of gunpowder. The ice wall, wind, frost, flames, and thunder shone at the foot of the mountain, and then it was shattered by the gunfire. Countless shells exploded in the crowd. The 3,000 people completely ignored it. A large number of their companions fell in front of them and at their feet. The 3,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion ignored it and faced the gunfire all over the sky. They stepped on the bodies of their companions. "Rush up. Rush over." Everyone was carrying out Li Zonghu's simplest and calmest order. No matter what they encountered, they were rushing up. Without hesitation, at all costs. Rush. The bodies of their comrades were trampled into flesh and blood. In the valley where blood and fire were flying at the same time, the soaring killing intent filled the air. Everyone's eyes were completely red. The marshal was watching them. His Highness was watching them. Jianghu state was watching them. The whole world was watching them. Rush up, rush over. No hesitation, no cowardice, no retreat, no looking back. Don't retreat, even if it's warm. Don't look back, even if you miss it very much. On the indomitable road, in addition to the bodies of the losers, there were also the songs of the winners. "We die a worthy death." This was the motto of the entire Dongqing clan. It was also the motto of the entire Border Control Corps. Rush up. Rush up. The bodies kept falling and being trampled into mud. The process from the foot of the mountain to the top was extremely long and short. The 3,000 Thunderbolt Battalion stepped on the road built by blood and corpses and rushed to the top of the mountain with unparalleled madness and unruliness. The moment the 3,000 people and the 30,000 people came into contact, the allied forces of the three countries began to collapse at the first time, and the formation suddenly became loose. Rush up. Rush over. This was the Thunderbolt Battalion. The strongest Thunderbolt Battalion. In the hundreds of years since the founding of Jianghu state, there had never been such a proud army. This was the most unyielding army in Jianghu state. The leader was invincible. Invincible. Chapter 429. Invincible in the world? Invincible? Invincible? There was no word to describe the momentum of the Snowdance Corps' charge. The fire burst on the mountainside, and dense bullets poured out like a rainstorm. In the coalition forces of the three states, everyone, whether in the fire-flaming realm or the thunder-shocking realm, attacked without reservation. The attacks all over the sky turned into dazzling light and shadow. The 3,000 people were constantly decreasing, but the speed of the charge was getting faster and faster, like a wildfire wantonly invading on the front line, like a crazy tide rushing in the deep sea. The attack was like fire. The momentum was like thunder. The skybreaker. This was not like a troop at all. It was like a knife, a sword, full of killing intent. Pure. Overall. When Li Zhonghu, who had been rushing in front of the 3,000 people, stepped on the top of the mountain, and the Scarlet Star flag flew in his hand, the coalition forces of the three states standing in front of the phalanx began to retreat almost instinctively. 30,000 against 3,000. But the whole situation was completely reversed in an instant. It was impossible to describe the situation on the top of the mountain as a rout. The most vivid description should be collapse. The most complete collapse. The coalition forces, which were so dense that they could not see the edge at a glance, began to loosen the moment they came into contact with the Snowdance Corps. The sound of artillery and firearms seemed to stagnate for a moment. Boundless lightning and raging fire flew out from every corner of the battlefield, covering the whole battlefield. After the ice condensed, it exploded in all directions. The setting sun was like blood. Blood flowed like a river. On the top of the mountain at the junction of Oga State and Wulan State, a large scarlet and dazzling wave of blood suddenly rose. Corpses, limbs, skulls, and broken weapons condensed together. In the scene like Shura hell, the setting sun gradually shone in the sky, which seemed to be endless lightning. Frost and flames flew at the same time in the storm of surging power, with blood and death, turning into a cold but fanatical war picture. In less than 5 minutes, the coalition forces of 30,000 people were directly torn apart by the Snowdance Corps from the front. They were like wolves and demons. But in the end, this was an army, the most elite combat corps that was completely dedicated to killing and fighting. The 3,000 people gathered together was like a huge meat grinder. The meat grinder moved forward slowly, harvesting the lives of the coalition forces like harvesting crops. 10 minutes. The Allied forces were completely routed. The last afterglow of the sun shone on the hillside, and the entire mountaintop had turned completely blood-red. In everyone's sight, the scarlet-red star flag of Jianghu state was still fluttering, unusually frivolous. In the sight that had begun to shake, the faces of the soldiers of the 3 Eastern European countries were distorted. Some people threw away their guns and ran for their lives. Some of them cried out in pain with pale faces. Some of them knelt down subconsciously and raised their hands. At the same time, there were also people who seemed to have lost their minds and started shooting crazily. In the end, they even rushed forward. His body swayed slightly. The initial pain had already passed, and he was gradually becoming numb. He could no longer condense the raging fire in his hand. Chest, abdomen, shoulder, more than 10 bullets embedded in his body were becoming colder and colder. His body temperature dropped. With his last breath, he reached out and grabbed the epaulet on his shoulder. He took off the epaulet representing the rank of colonel in Jianghu state with trembling hands and handed it to his most trusted subordinate. The endless darkness in front of him seemed to be gradually eroding him, and the countless voices in his ears began to become chaotic. Leader! Leader! Old Zhang! You are not allowed to go over. Follow the rules of the battlefield. To the leader. Countless chaotic voices seemed to ring in his ears, and then gradually faded away, getting farther and farther away from him. The Border Control Corps had the strictest battlefield discipline and detailed rules. The whole corps was based on the army. The 5 armies were based on the division. The division was based on the regimental headquarters. Going down layer by layer, it could be specific to the unit at the squad level. On the battlefield, no matter what combat establishment, when one's immediate superior died in battle, one was not allowed to collect the corpse. He was only allowed to carry the epaulette and average of the deceased. After the death of an officer, all subordinates must immediately be assigned to the establishment of the combat organization of the same level to continue fighting. No hesitation. No hesitation. This was the battlefield of the Border Control Corps. This was the war of the Border Control Corps. There were only 2 words for the Border Control Corps on the battlefield. Fight. Or sacrifice. The living would continue to fight. The sacrificed would spread their flesh and blood on the battlefield. Only the epaulette would eventually return to the homeland. The epaulette left his palm. The colonel's vision became completely blurred. When the darkness surrounded him, he remembered the golden epaulette he had just worn on his shoulder, his wife and daughter at home, and Jianghu state. The darkness grew darker and darker, but everything on the battlefield suddenly became clear. The colonel burst out laughing. An incomparably intense flame suddenly ignited on his body. He closed his eyes, and his body was completely tense. In the horrified gaze of the coalition forces of the 3 countries, his body flew over like a cannonball. The power turned into a raging flame. Then it was the cruelest coverage. There was no sound of explosion, but a raging fire with the afterglow of life suddenly exploded. In countless desperate screams, it swallowed everything. The Border Control Corps was still moving forward, and no one even looked at it. The Border Control Corps was still moving forward, and no one even looked at it. From beginning to end, they had only one order. Charge. The star flag in front of them was still fluttering. The former Thunderbolt Battalion of the Border Control Corps, and now the Thunderbolt Division of the Snowdance Corps, had no territory or land in their world, only the star flag. Where the star flag was fluttering, there would be no soldiers of the Thunderbolt Battalion, and there would be corpses of the Thunderbolt Battalion. The strongest elite corps of Jianghu state fell one after another. And the coalition forces of the 3 countries began to fall in batches. The 30,000 people seemed to have surrounded 3,000 people. But the whole scene looked like 30,000 people were completely crushed by 3,000 people. The whole battlefield became fragmented with the charge of the Snowdance Corps. In the center of the army formation, as the Snowdance Corps advanced, the torn army formation became more and more scattered. At the forefront of the Snowdance Corps, the fluttering star flag was about to completely break through the blockade of the 30,000 coalition forces. For the coalition forces, this was definitely an undignified defeat. But seeing that the Snowdance Corps had rushed over, everyone felt relieved. In front of the real army soul, everyone seemed to realize a fact. Dignity was far less important than living. The Snowdance Corps was about to break out of the coalition forces' blockade. All of a sudden, the star flag at the forefront suddenly stopped. Turn around. In an instant, the star flag, which was getting farther and farther away, began to get closer and closer. Li Zonghu did not completely rush out of the army formation. Instead, when he approached the back of the army formation, he did not hesitate to turn around and rush back in another direction. The morale of the entire Snowdance Corps rose to the limit in an instant. Charge. Countercharge. The army formation, which had become extremely scattered, was instantly penetrated again. The coalition forces of the 3 Eastern European countries began to flee in panic. The first batch of deserters began to appear on the battlefield. There were more and more deserters. It was almost the time when the situation was hopeless. At the rear of the coalition forces, in the headquarters that Li Zonghu had never reached, a dazzling flash of lightning suddenly covered 100 meters away. The experts of Wulan State, who had always been hiding in the army formation, finally took action. They were originally the force that laid the foundation of the overall situation. The high-level officials of the three countries all hoped to use ordinary troops to consume the strength of the Snowdance Corps, and finally let the experts decide the victory. But now the strength of the Snowdance Corps had not been consumed too much, and the experts guarding the border could not sit still at all. 100 meters away, the dazzling and condensed lightning spread rapidly in the air and went straight to the star flag at the forefront of the Snowdance Corps. The one who took action was a lieutenant general of the military of Wulan State. As an expert who was infinitely close to the half-step invincible realm, he could be sure that Li Zonghu was no match for him. Now that he had been preparing a full blow for a long time, it was almost no less than that of an ordinary half-step invincible realm expert. As long as he killed Li Zonghu with this blow, it would definitely be a huge setback for the Snowdance Corps. The lightning spread like a dragon. The figure of the lieutenant general of Wulan State rushed up to the sky and arrived with the lightning. He clenched his fists slightly. The huge force, which was almost no less than the full blow of a half-step invincible realm expert, was surging and was about to completely cover Li Zonghu. The world suddenly became extremely quiet for a moment. The chaotic noise on the battlefield seemed to have suddenly gone away. The last light of the setting sun remained tenaciously in the sky. But in an instant, the whole sky seemed to become extremely dark. The pitch-black sky was faintly glowing, and the faint crackling sound suppressed the slaughter on the battlefield. The air gradually became messy under the dark sky. Hundreds of meters away. Under the dark sky, General E of the 9th Heaven of Jianghu State pulled the exaggeratedly huge bow in his hand. He bent the bow like a full moon. The bowstring was pulled to the limit in an instant. A flash of lightning appeared in Yi's hand. The lightning gathered into an arrow. The lieutenant general of Wulan State, who was close to the half-step invincible realm, was less than 20 meters away from Li Zonghu. But under the pitch-black sky, these 20 meters looked like 20 li, keel, run. Run. A hoarse voice suddenly rang out behind the lieutenant general. A burst of extremely condensed killing intent locked on the lieutenant general in an instant. The lieutenant general subconsciously looked up at the sky. The sky changed slightly for a moment, and there was a touch of strange blue in the darkness. The lieutenant general's pupils suddenly contracted. This was not the night. The pitch-black darkness that enveloped the sky was astonishingly the extremely dense lightning. The absolute blue continued to gather and eventually turned into dead darkness. The lieutenant general struggled to turn his body. Whoosh! The sound of an arrow leaving the string suddenly passed through the entire battlefield. A dark blue arrow was already in front of the lieutenant general the moment the sound rang out. Wherever the blue arrow passed, the dark sky completely collapsed, and the thunderbolts fell like a rainstorm, destroying everything. This arrow was shot at the lieutenant general of Wulan State. But wherever the arrow passed, all the coalition forces of Wulan State were instantly turned into powder. There was no time to dodge. The blue arrow was like a blue light. As soon as the lieutenant general moved for a moment, the arrow had shot directly into his chest. Boom! It was as if a bomb had exploded on the battlefield. The blue arrow passed through hundreds of meters of bow and arrow, smashed all the defenses of the lieutenant general, and shot him directly into the air. The huge force obliterated his body and raged wildly around him. Wherever the blue light passed, no matter if it was an expert or a soldier, they were all crushed into pieces. The whole battlefield became extremely silent for a moment. The coalition forces of the three countries were slaughtered by the Snowdance Corps. None of the masters hiding in the back dared to make a move. That could be said to be an earth-shattering arrow. It represented too many things. Everyone thought of a legendary general in Jianghu State. There seemed to be only one master who used a bow in Jianghu State. Vermilion Bird, one of the four spirits. General of the 9th Heaven, E, and the one in his hand was like a nightmare to the enemy. Is this the string of rainstorm? Lin Yuxian looked at the huge bow and arrow in Yi's hand, and his eyes were a little fiery. The string of rainstorm was one of the legendary Four Spirits armors. It was as famous as the Azure Dragon armor of Gongsun Qi, the Azure Dragon of Zhongzhou State, the Curtain of Night. The Curtain of Night was attached with the world's top optical camouflage ability. The biggest feature of the string of rainstorm was its deformation and energy aggregation. To some extent, this bow already had the prototype of a thermal weapon. Yi did not speak. His palms slightly relaxed for a moment, and the huge bow and arrow in his hand began to twist. Finally, it wrapped around his arm and spread all the way. It turned into a close-fitting suit of changing colors and clung tightly to him. "It's your turn." After Yi shot the arrow, he looked at Lin Yuxian and said calmly, "Black Tortoise will follow you with 2 groups of terracotta army." Yi reached out and pointed forward. On the hillside, the Snowdance Corps was still rushing and killing. He pointed to another direction that was chaotic but temporarily could not be affected by the Snowdance Corps. "I choose there." Lin Yuxian shook his head and pointed to the left side of the coalition forces of the 3 countries. "The middle side will be handed over to the Snowdance Corps, the right side to the Terracotta Army, and the left side to me." "Yourself?" Yi and Li Wangxing frowned at the same time. "Enough." Lin Yuxian smiled. The soft sword was straightened in his hand. He moved forward slowly, and his aura began to change gradually. His injuries from the battle with Gu Xingyun had not yet healed. But he had broken through from the stabilization phase of the Thunder-Shocking Realm to the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm, and his injuries had been completely suppressed. With a sword in hand, Lin Yuxian thought of the martial arts that Li Tianlan had told him before. Such martial arts had no choice, no so-called path, no light and darkness, and no reality and illusion. Martial arts was martial arts. His martial arts was swordsmanship. That was swordsmanship. The simplest martial arts, the simplest swordsmanship, were also the most difficult. Invincible martial arts, invincible swordsmanship. Such martial arts did not need a path, so there was no need to choose. Therefore, Lin Yuxian made up his mind when he broke through. He did not need to choose anything. He had his own swordsmanship, so he still chose the 24 moves of sword. Lin Yuxian's figure walked to the foot of the mountain. Countless coalition forces appeared in his sight. Lin Yuxian narrowed his eyes and relaxed. The crazy sword intent suddenly spread with him as the center. The taut soft sword swept across the grass. The sword intent gradually turned into a storm. He chose the 24 moves of sword. One day, it would become his own 24 moves of sword. Lin Yuxian clenched the hilt of the sword and suddenly spun. A violent storm suddenly rose at the foot of the mountain. The 8th blade, burning sky. Lin Yuxian's body spun wildly and rushed directly to the top of the mountain with the rotating sword light from the foot of the mountain. The storm turned into a hurricane. With a loud whistling sound that resounded throughout the battlefield, it came down from above. Lin Yuxian's figure had disappeared. The sword intent had disappeared. There was only a crazy and almost completely out of control storm left on the entire battlefield. Wherever the storm passed, boulders and grass rushed into the sky. The whole mountain trembled violently under the storm. The mountain was completely torn apart by the storm and began to collapse. Finally, it was swept into the storm. The entire mountain seemed to have flown up under this sword. This was just a sword. But it was like an eternal sword. The storm formed by the sword light tore the mountain peak and rushed into the crowd while the earth was shaking. Bloody rain and wind. It was just like what they had predicted. The charge of the Snowdance Corps. Yi's arrow. His sword. This battle was enough. Wulan State, August 7th. At 4:50 p.m. The 30,000-strong coalition forces of Wulan State, Oga State, and Ra State encountered the 3,000 Snowdance Corps on the border of Wulan State. At 5:25 p.m. The 30,000-strong coalition forces completely lost their combat effectiveness and completely collapsed. In half an hour, the 3,000 Snowdance Corps went in and out of the 30,000-strong coalition forces 3 times and completely broke up the last trace of combat effectiveness of the coalition forces. At 5:40 p.m. the elites of the Snowdance Corps officially entered Wulan State and went straight to Reki City. And at this time, it had been 12 hours since Li Tianlan caused a great change in Reki City. I didn't update yesterday. I sent a leave notice. As expected, many people couldn't see it if I posted it there. I changed to a new computer. I was too late yesterday to work on the computer, so I didn't write it. The input method was gone. It was estimated that there would be a lot of typos recently. And it was the end of the year. There were a lot of things to do. I'll ask for leave as little as possible. I'll be fine after the spring festival. Chapter 430. Among the 4 major families in Eastern Europe, the Rekvia family was recognized as the weakest. It could only dominate the base camp in Eastern Europe, and its sphere of influence had always been difficult to go out of Eastern Europe. In contrast, the other 3 major families in Eastern Europe, Morton, Violet, and the Qin family, may not be much stronger than Rekvia in Eastern Europe, but outside Eastern Europe, their strong capital would not be much weaker than theirs in Eastern Europe. The main reason for this embarrassing situation was that the Rekvia family did not have its own invincible realm expert. When the Polar Ground Alliance existed, as one of the 4 pillar families of the Polar Ground Alliance, Rekvia's shortcoming of lacking high-end combat power had been intentionally or unintentionally covered. With the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, the most fatal flaw of the entire Rekvia was completely exposed in an instant. In such a state, the Rekvia family, in the eyes of enemies of the same level, was completely like a beast with a body but no sharp claws. The deterrent might still be there, but the overall combat effectiveness had fallen to the lowest point. The Morton family had its own invincible realm expert. The Violet family also had it. The Qin family also had it. The Rekvia family had what was known as the strongest war fortress in Eastern Europe, the Rekvia Castle. The entire Rekvia family built their castle at all costs. They used the most advanced scientific defense system to make up for the lack of an invincible realm expert in their family. From another point of view, in the heart of the Rekvia family, their castle should be equivalent to an invincible realm expert, at least not much worse. The most advanced defense system, the most accurate firepower coverage, and enough experts to maintain the operation of the castle, the entire Rekvia castle could be said to have almost no dead spots. This was the battlefield Li Tianlan chose. Maybe it was not the most perfect. But in Eastern Europe, in Wulan State, and in Reki City, this was already the best battlefield he could find. The Jianghu family of South America would not retreat. Li Tianlan could only use everything in the castle to face Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost. The entire castle trembled under the tremendous force. The moment Jiang Qiansong chose to move forward, the curtains of the stalemate were lifted. All the defense and offensive systems in the Rekvia castle began to run. From a distance, the entire castle seemed to be glowing. With a super high temperature, it was enough to destroy everything. Lasers shot out from all corners of the castle. Beams of changing colors intertwined into a light curtain, shining in front of the castle door. Jiang Qiansong was still moving forward. With him as the center, the space in front of the castle had completely solidified into an absolute defensive field. The field of the 30-meter mortal world became extremely dark around him, and the space completely condensed into a hole. In front of the castle, a precious energy was burning. The surging lasers kept hitting the solidified space. A large piece of the solidified space rippled like water, but there was no sign of it shattering. In terms of real combat power, Jiang Qiansong was not at the top of the divine list. But in terms of defense, he was definitely the best in the world. Forward. 30-meter mortal world iron wall. Endless lasers shook the domain around Jiang Qiansong. Black Ghost followed Jiang Qiansong without leaving his side. The castle's main gate was getting closer and closer to them. Jiang Qiansong raised his head and stared at Li Tianlan, who was standing at the top of the castle. Li Tianlan lowered his head and calmly looked down at Jiang Qiansong. His body stood at the highest point of the castle, as steady as a rock. Another 5 meters. Watching Jiang Qiansong pushing the domain forward, Li Tianlan thought quietly. Another 5 meters. Looking at Li Tianlan above the castle, Jiang Qiansong was also thinking. 5 meters was very short. But in the countless destructive lasers flying, it was so long. The more he went forward, the more lasers there were, and the denser the frequency was. Jiang Qiansong, who was moving forward against the lasers, looked more and more serious. 30-meter mortal world was really close to 9 meters. The dark domain with a radius of 30 meters was constantly fluctuating under the impact of the lasers, looking vague and messy. Black Ghost's thick arm trembled slightly, and he held the black knife in his hand. A deep darkness comparable to the night continued to spread in his hands, and eventually covered his whole body. An extremely sharp and terrifying killing intent surged within the domain. 5 meters. This was also his best attack distance. Both were 5 meters. Forward. 4 meters. Jiang Qiansong's face became completely dignified. Black Ghost's figure was completely hidden in the dark knife light. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and took a step forward calmly. 3 meters. The breeze and drifting clouds of Sai City appeared above the castle. 2 meters. All the experts of the Wuxia family were ready. Jiang Qiansong took a deep breath. 1 meter. Li Tianlan suddenly took a step forward. 1 step, 1 meter. The moment the distance was shortened by him, the whole castle seemed to become extremely illusory. Jiang Qiansong's last step fell. The domain of the 30-meter mortal world suddenly expanded. 30-meter mortal world moon in the mirror. The densest lasers fell on his domain. The expanded domain collapsed inwardly for a moment, and then swelled up again. The domain was moving forward. Countless lasers that fell on the domain bounced back to the castle at the same time. The castle really existed. But in everyone's perception, it seemed to have disappeared like an illusion. An illusory but clear sword intent blocked the way in front of the castle. The bounced laser passed through the sword intent. Li Tianlan's body suddenly shook. But the power in the domain and the power of the laser began to dissipate. After brewing for a long time, the long darkness rushed out of Jiang Qiansong's domain. In the incomparably arrogant roar, the darkness was like a knife. The light between heaven and earth completely converged with Black Ghost's knife. Black Ghost's long knife was raised high. In the almost lightless night, a pitch-black giant blade with a length of hundreds of meters suddenly appeared. The giant blade chopped down wildly. Cool breeze and drifting clouds. All the experts of the Wuxia family took action at the same time. The lasers were still shooting. Thunderbolts and flames soared in the air, with great power to meet the flash of knife light. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed again. He knew the result of this collision. But there was no time to remind anything. Large pieces of thunderbolts and flames were compatible with the knife light. The darkness spread all the way. The light was obliterated all the way in the dark knife light. Li Tianlan opened his mouth, but he only had time to say one word. Retreat. Boom. His voice was completely drowned out by the loud noise in an instant. The pitch-black giant blade in the air suddenly suppressed all the thunderbolts and flames, and the crazy knife directly slashed on the castle. This was a full blow by an invincible realm expert who gave up defense in order to pursue the strongest attack power. Black Ghost's strongest blow. This knife was called Annihilation. Except for Jiang Qiansong, no one and nothing could stop this blow. Li Tianlan couldn't stop it. The castle couldn't stop it either. Boom! The dirt flew all over the sky, and a huge crack suddenly appeared on the front gate of the huge castle under the knife light. In the horrified eyes of countless people, the entire wall on one side of the castle was completely shattered by this knife. A quarter of the exquisite and strong castle defense was directly destroyed under this knife. The castle became ugly, and no one could care about it. The simplest question in front of everyone. The castle gate had been completely broken. Outside the door, there were two invincible realm experts of hostile forces standing at this time. This was the simplest question and the most fatal one. Jiang Qinsong's domain once again wrapped Black Ghost. He raised his head and glanced up. Li Tianlan still stood there, calm and collected. Jiang Qinsong smiled and said calmly, "I'm coming to kill you." Li Tianlan was in a trance. He still remembered what he said to Jiang Qinyan more than 10 hours ago. Then Jiang Qinyan died. And now, karma? Li Tianlan sneered. He didn't bother to think about the so-called karma. This was the current situation. He couldn't retreat. So even in the face of two invincible realm experts, the only thing he could do was to take action. Fight to the death. Chapter 431. No matter how advanced a dead thing was, it was not as good as a flexible expert. The gate of Rekvia's castle, known as the strongest war fortress in Eastern Europe, was completely shattered in a full charge by two invincible realm experts. Although such a situation was not a desperate situation, the pressure at that moment was like a dark cloud covering the sky, shrouding everyone's heart. It was still raining. The patter of rain swallowed the gloomy light. The sky gradually changed from day to night. The solemn atmosphere froze everyone's expression. From the top to the bottom of the castle, everyone looked dignified. Tostel stood in the command room in the center of the castle, and his whole body was completely tense. As the usurper of the Rekvia family, this was the time when he was closest to success, but it was also the most dangerous time. All of this depended on the outcome between Li Tianlan and the Jiang family of South America. And the winner's final choice. All the weapons in the castle were ready. As Jiang Qinsong moved forward, the automatic system accurately locked Jiang Qinsong and Black Ghost. Jiang Qinsong moved forward slowly, his pace calm and relaxed. There were still experts of Rekvia who survived in front of the collapsed gate of the castle. As Jiang Qinsong moved forward, Rekvia's thunder-shocking realm experts and fire-flaming realm experts retreated in large numbers. Li Tianlan still stood at the top of the castle, squinting at this scene without saying a word. In the command room, Tostel took a deep breath and slowly said, "Fire." Jiang Qinsong could not move. He moved forward step by step. This was coercion. Li Tianlan could not move. Time was on his side, and he also had a lot of time to choose. But Tostel had to move. Standing here, he had no way out. He chose Li Tianlan and Zhongzhou State. Such a choice meant that he had to at least make some actions in line with his current position. He really didn't like the Jiang family of South America. Especially after the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, without the deterrence of the Invincible Realm, facing the ambitious Jiang family of South America, Rekvia could hardly see any living space in the future. Li Tianlan had a good chance of winning. Tostel firmly believed that. Fire. It was heavy and clear. He repeated it again. As long as he helped Li Tianlan win this victory, Rekvia would be on the big ship of Zhongzhou State. It would get more than just a chance to breathe. Perhaps it would be even more glorious in the future. Compared with being annexed by the Jiang family of South America, that prospect was definitely worth Tostel's fight. The Rekvia executives in the command room were still hesitating. Tostel, who had made up his mind, walked over and pressed the button to activate all the weapons in the castle. An ear-piercing alarm suddenly rang throughout the entire castle. Jiang Qinsong stepped into the castle. Lasers filled the sky and exploded in every corner of the castle. Boom! Creak! Amidst the dull sound, the entire huge ancient castle began to slowly change. The wall closest to Jiang Qinsong was shaking violently. The walls in all directions were slowly squeezed in by the flying lasers. The entire structure of the ancient castle began to slowly deform. After discarding some of the complicated but useless buildings, the entire ancient castle looked increasingly sharp and sinister. Li Tianlan watched all this quietly. His palm moved slowly. Falling stars gradually turned into a silver blade, and he held it tightly in his hand. The field of 30-meter mortal world opened up around Jiang Qiansong. Jiang Qiansong was expressionless as he threw a punch at the walls that were pressing in from all directions without hesitation. An earth-shattering explosion sounded without warning. The squeezed wall encountered a huge force and directly triggered the self-destruction system. The violent explosion stagnated for a moment outside the field of 30-meter mortal world, and then the intense fire completely swallowed Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost. The raging fire madly impacted the field of 30-meter mortal world with the impact of the explosion. The moment the fire suddenly covered him, Jiang Qiansong raised his head subconsciously. In his sight, the place where Li Tianlan had stood was empty. Jiang Qiansong's heart sank slightly. The entire castle seemed to move completely at the moment of the explosion. The muzzles of lasers in all corners of the castle turned at the same time. Countless lasers gathered on a huge stone ball in the center of the castle. The stone ball, which seemed to be casually placed in the open air of the castle as a decoration, suddenly rotated in the convergence of the lasers. The converging lasers continued to intertwine and spread around the rotating stone ball, and eventually intertwined into a light curtain with a terrifying high temperature. All the light seemed to lose all its destructive power in the blink of an eye. But the high temperature continued to condense, sweeping everything around it. There was only high temperature. The terrifying extreme high temperature covered Jiang Qiansong's field before the sound of the explosion fell, and then rushed past the back of Jiang Qiansong's field. The light curtain continued to spread. Along the way, the field of 30-meter mortal world quickly melted away, and outside the field, half of the castle was completely shattered by this blow. The vast thunderbolt directly covered the moment the light curtain passed. Cool breeze and drifting cloud. All the masters of the Wuxia family made a full effort at the same time. This was the weakest time of the field of 30-meter mortal world. It was also the best time to hit Jiang Qiansong hard. No one expected that Wuxia's laser weapons would be so terrifying. Similarly, no one could expect that the self-destruction device in Wuxia's castle would have such a powerful destructive power. Even the Wuxia family itself did not expect it. This was known as the strongest war fortress in Eastern Europe. But since the establishment of the castle, it was the first time it had experienced the flames of war. All the laser weapons exhausted all the energy at one time, destroying half of the castle, but at the same time, it also suppressed Jiang Qiansong's field to the lowest point. The dim light of the 30-meter mortal world was in the soaring fire. The light and messy light curtain flickered constantly. Large thunderbolts immediately covered it. The light filled everything. In the chaotic light and shadow, Jiang Qiansong's angry roar suddenly sounded. The thunderbolts were spreading. The light curtain was spreading. The flickering 30-meter mortal world quietly blended into a dark blade light. The whole field seemed to become dark in the knife light. The darkness permeated the light curtain and kept twisting. 30-meter mortal world, stealing the sky for changing the sun. Stealing the sky for changing the sun, borrowing strength and momentum. With Black Ghost's full cooperation, the dark knife light and the field of 30-meter mortal world were almost completely integrated together. Jiang Qiansong was strong in defense. Black Ghost was strong in attack. This style of stealing the sky for changing the sun was enough to fully combine all the advantages of the two. Such a power could even make Jiang Qiansong continuously advance several ranks on the divine list. The knife light and the field that were integrated into one broke out wildly. The space was completely broken in an instant. In the night that fell in a trance, a layer of gray ripples visible to the naked eye appeared in the space. The destructive explosion, and the dense thunderbolts were all absorbed by the gray space ripples. It became a dark field that swept through all the destructive forces. The whole world appeared in front of Jiang Qiansong's eyes. But what appeared in front of him was not the castle. It was the most real world that was separated from the illusion. The most real, the quietest, the most vast, and the smallest. The whole world began to shrink in absolute silence. There was no sound, no scenery, and no night in the night. In a trance, misty, but extremely real world, there was only one sword light. The forever silent world. Jiang Qinsong remembered the final maneuver of Zhongzhou State. In the final maneuver, he had seen this style and had vaguely tried to capture that trace of sword intent. But at this moment, the forever silent world that appeared in front of him was completely different from what he had seen before. This style of forever silent world was actually just a starting move. The silver sword light was lifted up little by little in the absolutely quiet world. The sword light was extremely bright. But the sword edge seemed extremely heavy. Li Tianlan held the sword as if he was holding the whole world. This sword was not a sword that belonged to his martial arts. At least not before today. So when this sword appeared in front of Jiang Qinsong, he suddenly felt very familiar. This was the sword that Li Tianlan had been thinking about. He had not yet grasped the essence of this sword, so this sword was not the strongest. But it was the most suitable. This sword originated from Zhongzhou State's sword emperor, Wang Tianzong. It originated from his sword that set off a 10,000-meter sword intent at the intersection of the Pacific Ocean and the Arctic Ocean that day. This was a sword that he simulated in his constant thinking. He started with the forever silent world. This style. It was called the Long Rainbow. Chapter 432. Jiang Qinsong watched Li Tianlan draw the sword. The blade of falling stars shone with a sharpness that could dispel the night. The forever silent world started. This sword was neither fast nor slow. But it gave people a feeling that it could not be dodged. The world was silent. Extreme silence was nothingness. Nothingness was reality. The sword light on the blade of falling stars was also very real. It was a real boundless world. In the boundless illusory sword intent, everything was not relative. It was not relative to speed, nor was it relative to slow. That sword was there, fast or slow had no meaning. Only the most realistic and illusory sword seemed to exist eternally. The forever silent world Long Rainbow. The long rainbow in the night was full of light for thousands of miles. The silver sword light enveloped the falling star's sword, swallowed Li Tianlan, and covered the castle. The extremely dazzling sword light became brighter and brighter. Jiang Qinsong's pupils lost Li Tianlan's shadow. The night came again after the absolutely dazzling light. The light still existed, but it was extremely condensed in an instant. The infinite light shrank together, getting brighter and brighter, but getting smaller and smaller. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow. The whole world became a battlefield of light and darkness. Everything around seemed to have completely disappeared. A boundless light that seemed to cover the world finally completely condensed on the blade of falling stars. Jiang Qinsong's pupils suddenly contracted to the extreme. In the darkness, the dazzling and almost brilliant sword light began to extend. The light was extremely small, but the brightness was absolutely blazing. Li Tianlan, Jiang Qinsong, Black Ghost. Falling stars, 30-meter mortal world, dark sword light. Everything seemed to be connected by this extremely heavy and bright sword light. Speed, distance, even time, had completely lost its meaning. Jiang Qinsong quietly stared at the sword light in the darkness. He didn't know how long it had been. At the moment when the sword intent lit up, time no longer flowed relative, and speed no longer played a relative role. Everything was relative, and everything was not relative. This was Li Tianlan's full-strength sword in his peak state. Where the sword intent spread, it was not so much a domain, but a world. A world that made Jiang Qinsong completely strange. He couldn't adapt to the reality of this world. He still preferred the world that everyone knew. In the world that everyone lived in, time flowed relative to each other. Fast was faster than slow, slow was slower than fast. Light was rising relative to falling, darkness was rising relative to falling, forward was moving forward relative to retreating, and backward relative to advancing relative to retreating. Even if time was still, it was still relative to advancing and retreating. It was a world where all things were relative. At this moment, in the absolute silence of the void, an instant seemed like an eternity. Fast was slow, slow was fast. In the void, there were no living things, and there were no opposites. Reality and illusion. So, was this sword real or just an illusion? Jiang Qinsong could not adapt to such a world. Therefore, when the sword light shone, when the sword light converged, when the sword light spread, from the beginning to the end, he did not react at all. If all things did not oppose each other, then any reaction would no longer have any meaning. Jiang Qinsong's eyes were in a trance. In absolute silence and nothingness, this sword strike had brought him terror. What was left was shock and a hint of indistinct understanding. What was a prodigy? Only those who had absolute dominance in an era could be called heaven's chosen one. Those who could lead the progress of martial arts in an era could be called heaven's chosen one. Hundreds of years ago, the prodigy ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai and the ancestor of the Lin clan shocked the world in their most glorious period. From that time on, the Dark World had the 4 realms of martial arts and the Invincible Realm. Today, hundreds of years later, in this sword strike, Jiang Qinsong vaguely seemed to see the possibility of surpassing the Invincible Realm. The darkness continued to spread. The sword light on the blade of falling stars began to spread forward. It did not bloom. The light was condensed to the extreme and spread straight. It was like a ray of light that broke the night curtain. A long rainbow. It was very small, but it was extremely brilliant and gorgeous. It was not a sword strike that covered everything. This sword was an extremely condensed point. The tiny light traversed the sky, tore the night curtain, and almost ignored the space. The sword light converged into a line and pierced the 30-meter mortal world domain filled with dark saber light. There was no difference between weak and strong. This was an absolutely condensed but very casual sword strike. It did not matter if it was pierced at any point. Because he firmly believed in the sharpness of his sword strike. Indestructible. Indestructible. This was the first time since Li Tianlan had determined his path and achieved the basic level of martial arts that he used his sword with all his strength. He was unprecedentedly focused and dignified. At all costs. The great power moved forward with pure sword intent. Eternity was like a moment. Li Tianlan's body was stretched to the limit in an instant. The bones pulled the muscles, and the muscles tore the blood vessels. Blood came out of his body all over. A faint cracking sound seemed to ring in his body. Li Tianlan spat out a mouthful of blood, and a vein in his body that was difficult to grasp seemed to be unable to bear the force of this sword strike and broke inch by inch. The next moment, the brilliant sword light condensed to the extreme suddenly flew out and fell on Jiang Qinsong's domain. The domain in the darkness was silent for a moment. The expressions on the faces of Jiang Qinsong and Black Ghost were completely frozen. In the next second, an earth-shattering noise suddenly resounded through the mountains and fields. The domain and the sword light were completely broken. The whole space completely collapsed and exploded. The empty and quiet void spread in the chaotic power. The 30-meter mortal world and the dark saber light disappeared completely. Only the light still existed, so real, so sharp. Forward. Forward with indomitable will. The light was like a column. From the light to a column of light. The sword intent had begun to disperse, but the residual power of this sword still carried a murderous aura that was enough to tear everything. This was a young edge that had never appeared in Zhongzhou State or even the entire Dark World for hundreds of years. A sword proud of the world. The residual power of the sword light was mighty. Black Ghost instinctively came to Jiang Qinsong's side. But he didn't stand in front of him. Instead, he hid behind Jiang Qinsong. Jiang Qinsong raised his arm. At this moment, almost all his defensive means were useless. Rekvia's castle burned all the energy to make the laser weapon burst out completely at one time. Countless masters attacked at the same time, and all the forces were obliterating his domain. At the moment when his domain was at its weakest, Li Tianlan directly drew his sword. Thousands of miles of rainbow. Even he could hardly react to the sword light that extended forward in an instant. He couldn't count on Black Ghost. Although Black Ghost was also in the invincible realm, he was in the invincible realm who gave up all the defense power. In the face of this sword, even if it was just the residual power, it was enough to kill him. The only thing Jiang Qiansong could do was barely raise his arm. He grasped a metal plate in his palm. The metal plate suddenly opened at the moment when the sword light pierced over, turning into a shield that could protect the vital parts of his upper body. The shield shone instantly in the face of the condensed sword light. Jiang Qiansong raised the shield to meet it. The sword light and the shield touched. What sounded was not the sound of collision, but a clear sound of breaking. The shield that could make Jiang Qiansong carry with him was almost completely torn apart by the sword light in an instant. The sword light, which was so subtle that it was hard to detect, passed through Jiang Qiansong's arm. Jiang Qiansong's body shook violently, and a large amount of blood burst out of his whole arm. Jiang Qiansong's face was a little pale, and his bloody arm trembled slightly. He raised his head and looked at Li Tianlan. Without the illumination of the sword light, Li Tianlan looked extremely illusory in the darkness. His face was also pale, and there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. But in a trance, Jiang Qiansong suddenly felt that Li Tianlan in this state was calmer than before. Li Tianlan took a step forward. His eyes were pure and focused. There was only the craziest killing intent. Jiang Qiansong took a deep breath and suddenly made up his mind. In the current situation, he had a lot of choices. For example, he suppressed Li Tianlan, let Black Ghost kill the masters of Cool Breeze, Drifting Cloud, and Rekvia, and finally killed Li Tianlan and recooperated with Rekvia. Or let Black Ghost collide with Li Tianlan, and he destroyed the entire castle by himself. Or, there were many possibilities. They were not easy, but there was a chance of success. But at this moment, Jiang Qiansong suddenly gave up all the plans. His eyes were a little annoyed, but he eventually calmed down and became very firm. Because things had come to this point, he suddenly found that many things were meaningless. Li Tianlan and the Jiang family of South America had a deep cause and effect. And Li Tianlan, not to mention the future, even now, it was a little terrifying. Jiang Qiansong had a certain degree of certainty to win this game, but he and Black Ghost separated, but he had no certainty to keep Li Tianlan. If Li Tianlan was alive, even if the Jiang family of South America regained the right to cooperate with Rekvia and even won the chaos in Eastern Europe, what was the point? Of course, at that time, Li Tianlan might be very miserable. But Jiang Qiansong was not sure that Li Tianlan would die in that state. After all, there was Samsara Palace behind him. There were even a large number of forces in Zhongzhou state that supported him. Li Tianlan did not die. The future of the Jiang family of South America was the end of the world. This was the simplest logic. All the twists and turns in Jiang Qiansong's mind became clear and straight in an instant. He looked at Li Tianlan and spoke slowly. "Ague." Black Ghost responded and walked to Jiang Qiansong's side. "Come with me." Jiang Qiansong said in a low voice, "Kill him." This was Jiang Qiansong's decision. The interests after annexing the Rekvia family. The prospects after winning the chaos in Eastern Europe. Everything disappeared from Jiang Qiansong's mind at this moment. It did not matter. But at the moment, he had a more important goal. This trip to Eastern Europe, even if the Jiang family of South America would fail, or even get nothing in the end, it was acceptable. As long as he killed Li Tianlan, this would be the biggest gain of the Jiang family of South America's trip to Eastern Europe, even better than the cooperation with Rekvia. So at this moment, what Jiang Qiansong wanted was more than just victory. What he wanted most was Li Tianlan's life. At all costs. It's the Spring Festival recently, so the number of words in each chapter is very small. Even half a chapter at a time. There are too many things. It's normal after the annual meeting. Now write less. At present, if I can keep updating, I will be very satisfied. Chapter 433. Jiang Qiansong had used his own actions to prove what it meant to risk everything. In the deep night, the sword intent had not completely dispersed. The ruptured space was still spreading, and the space was filled with twisted dark ripples. The ripples still carried a destructive power, destroying everything in their path unscrupulously. Half of the castle had already collapsed. Light leaked out and shone in the darkness. In the chaotic brilliance, everything in the surroundings became extremely blurry. Jiang Qinsong's voice seemed to shatter in the distorted space. But Black Ghost, who was very close to him, clearly heard Jiang Qinsong's order. Without any hesitation, he raised the jet black dagger in his hand. But Jiang Qinsong was faster than him. Before his voice died away, he had already pounced on Li Tianlan. At this moment, it seemed that all interests and prospects were not as important as killing Li Tianlan for Jiang Qinsong. Black Ghost followed closely behind. The two invincible realm experts charged at the same time. The saber light and the domain emanated an overwhelming pressure. Li Tianlan's expression was still calm, but under the illumination of the pervasive light of the domain, his face was strangely pale. No one knew what kind of price he had to pay for that 10,000 miles rainbow. Even Li Tianlan himself did not know whether such a sacrifice was good or bad. Thousands of miles of rainbow broke the domain maintained by Jiang Qinsong and Black Ghost, and at the same time destroyed Jiang Qinsong's life-saving shield. The most powerful sword attack almost broke the dual wind and thunder veins in his body. The dual wind and thunder veins were still in his body, but the speed and strength he could exert had been greatly suppressed. It seemed to have returned to the standard of the normal wind and thunder veins. This wasn't a good thing. However, temporarily losing the dual wind and thunder veins meant that he had lost some of his speed and strength, but at the same time, his weakness of not being able to balance his strength, speed, and willpower was infinitely reduced. With the normal wind and thunder veins, Li Tianlan was calmer than before. However, this moment of calmness was completely shattered when Jiang Qinsong pounced over. The entire dark world knew that Jiang Qinsong was famous for his defense. But as an invincible realm expert on the divine list, no matter how bad his attack power was, it was still at the invincible realm level. The 30-meter mortal world condensed around him. Jiang Qinsong's speed was as fast as a phantom. Countless shadows suddenly filled Li Tianlan's sight. In Li Tianlan's eyes, Jiang Qinsong was still charging. The other party's tightly clenched fist had already smashed over. Jiang Qinsong's 30-meter mortal world was infinitely close to the real 30-meter mortal world. 9 zhang. Almost 30 meters. Jiang Qinsong punched out, and all the power belonging to the invincible realm poured wildly in the space with a radius of 30 meters. It was just like Li Tianlan's 10,000-mile rainbow. The pure 30-meter mortal world, which had shrunk to the extreme, was Jiang Qinsong's world. When he punched out, there was only power in his world. All the power erupted hysterically in the space within a radius of 30 meters. The mighty destructive power hit the edge of the domain and rolled back, repeating over and over again, tyrannical like a tide. In Jiang Qinsong's world, this punch was enough to destroy the world. 30-meter secular world Armageddon. Li Tianlan had nowhere to retreat in the violent power that was like a storm and a wave. This was Jiang Qinsong's domain. The world was huge. But now, these 30 meters belonged to Jiang Qinsong, and it was also all that Li Tianlan could feel. He stepped forward. Forward. Li Tianlan's movements were extremely stretched, and the vibration of countless joints turned from a soft sound to a high sound, like a dragon. But he held the hilt of falling stars tightly in his hand. Dragon Fist, Azure Dragon Arrow. Shattering style. The unique skill of the Li family. His own martial arts. For a while, they were completely integrated. Only those who had really understood the Li family's inheritance and had their own martial arts could combine the two unique skills so perfectly. Dragon Fist, Azure Dragon Arrow. The beginning of Dragon Fist. This was the first move of the 72 styles of Dragon Fist. Under this punch, he sought the most fierce and penetrating power. And Li Tianlan's own shattering style also condensed the power into one point. In the domain of the 30-meter mortal world, he could not overturn Jiang Qinsong's world, but he could try his best to tear a gap that could let him breathe in this world with the slightest but most fierce sword intent. The night was extremely quiet. Li Tianlan stabbed forward with his sword. The moment the sword intent broke out, Jiang Qinsong's mighty punch with great power had directly smashed over. The violent power and the condensed sword intent surged at the same time within the range of tens of meters, but silently. The real battle of the invincible realm had long lost the gorgeous scene of surging flames when experts of the thunder-shocking realm fought. There was only the most direct, the most dangerous, and also the simplest collision. There was no sound, but it was earth-shattering in an instant. The fierce sword intent collided with the endless power domain. The space within 30 meters around Jiang Qinsong suddenly fluctuated violently. The air was constantly twisting. In a blur, everyone could vaguely see the shadows of Li Tianlan and Jiang Qinsong. Li Tianlan moved forward with his sword. Jiang Qinsong no longer clenched his fists. He put his palms together and calmly clamped the blade of Li Tianlan's sword with both hands. The sword intent gradually became sparse. But the violent power was still surging. It was like a confrontation or a stalemate for a moment. Li Tianlan held the blade tightly and stepped forward. Jiang Qinsong stepped forward at the same time. Boom! The sound of the space exploding suddenly sounded between the long sword and the palms put together. The flying sword intent and the power domain roaring like a storm were completely out of control in an instant. The entire domain that was flickering with a gloomy luster became completely clear in an instant. The condensed sword intent began to disappear. The domain had a clear shape. A faint wall of light suddenly appeared in front of Jiang Qinsong. The light wall pressed forward and covered Li Tianlan's body. Jiang Qinsong's body trembled slightly, and then he was motionless. Li Tianlan's body shook violently, and at the same time, his whole body flew backward for tens of meters and smashed into an open-air flower bed in the castle. The flower bed completely collapsed, and the branches, leaves, and flowers were crushed in the impact. Li Tianlan's body, which fell to the ground, moved. Before he could stand up, the black knife light had come across the sky and swept directly to his head. Jiang Qinsong strode forward. The invincible realm expert on the divine list, who was famous for his defense, was in an all-out offensive posture at this time. He and Black Ghost were on the left and right. They didn't even give Li Tianlan half a second to breathe. As soon as the attack ended, a more fierce attack had come. The black knife light was like a thunderbolt that tore the world apart, and the light with killing intent condensed into a round arc of light in the air. The arc of light went from top to bottom, and the knife cut directly to Li Tianlan. Jiang Qinsong's attack followed closely. His attack power was not as good as Black Ghost's, but his power was extremely heavy and steady, like a surging river, continuous and endless. Li Tianlan lay on the ground and seemed to glance at the dark knife light. The knife light cut down like thunder and cut through Li Tianlan's body, but it seemed to cut in the air. The blade swept through Li Tianlan's body. Li Tianlan's figure gradually became faint and became a shadow. His figure reappeared in the place where he had just fought with Jiang Qinsong. Blood flowed down from his body, but his essence, qi, and spirit were still strong and abundant. Black Ghost and Jiang Qinsong stopped for a moment and looked back at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was also looking at them. The scenery of this castle is very good. Jiang Qinsong said, "It's worth it for you to die here." At this time, he had completely set his goal on Li Tianlan, and he temporarily ignored everything in Eastern Europe. In such a state of mind, they had two invincible realm experts. This was an overwhelming advantage. Jiang Qinsong's heart calmed down again. He really couldn't think of any reason why Li Tianlan could not die. Li Tianlan was silent. The current situation was obvious. Jiang Qinsong's attack power was indeed not strong. He could take the opponent's full blow, and he was injured but not killed, which was enough to prove that the opponent's attack power was really nothing compared to his defense. It was difficult for Jiang Qinsong to kill Li Tianlan now alone. But it was even more impossible for Li Tianlan to kill him. Black Ghost's defense was very poor. His defense absolutely could not stop Li Tianlan's full blow. But in the same way, Li Tianlan could not stop Black Ghost's full blow. Either one of these two invincible realm experts stood in front of Li Tianlan alone, and Li Tianlan would not be too embarrassed. It involved Jiang Qinsong. It was a fight to the death with Black Ghost. But if the two stood together, it was almost a fatal situation for Li Tianlan when their defense and attack were completely compensated. He couldn't beat them. He couldn't run away. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, and his eyes became colder. How do you want to die? Jiang Qinsong didn't want to delay time. As he spoke, he followed Black Ghost side by side again. Li Tianlan suddenly lowered his head. He raised his wrist and looked at the time. It was 6:40 p.m. When the sky in Jianghu state had just dimmed, Eastern Europe, which was also in summer, had ushered in the night. Li Tianlan laughed and said, "I want you to die first." Chapter 434. Jiang Qinsong keenly noticed that Li Tianlan was looking at his watch. His heart skipped a beat, but it wasn't because he realized something. Instead, he was a little confused. He couldn't figure out what reinforcements Li Tianlan could have under such circumstances. Li Tianlan's biggest reinforcement in Eastern Europe was undoubtedly the Samsara Palace. The headquarters of Samsara Palace was smashed by Wang Tianzong's sword. It was said that even the master of Samsara Palace had died, but Qin Weibai inexplicably got closer to the Lin clan. The Lin clan never entered the secular world. However, the super underground organizations that were truly powerful were all aware of the existence of such a colossus. Usually, no one would provoke the Lin clan. The Lin clan had never provoked others. But now, the mysterious patriarch of the Lin clan had followed Qin Weibai to Eastern Europe. This fact might have been well hidden at the beginning, but now, Lin Fengting's existence had already aroused the vigilance of all forces. At the same time, they were also vigilant against the Samsara Palace, which still had a lot of remnants. Since Lin Fengting followed Qin Weibai to Eastern Europe, he naturally had a reason to help Li Tianlan. But the problem was that it was impossible for Lin Fengting to appear here. Reki City was nearly 1,000 kilometers away from Mormons. Even if they flew over, it would take time. It was impossible for Lin Fengting. The two invincible realm experts of Sai City just left Reki City last night, and their whereabouts were unknown. It should be impossible. As for the Wang family of Beihai, from the standpoint of the entire Jianghu state, if Wang Tianzong appeared here, he would definitely help Li Tianlan under the gaze of the whole world. After all, some grievances could not be directly put on the table. But Wang Tianzong was not here either. Li Tianlan could only rely on himself and the team around him that was not weak but could not play a decisive role. Team. Jiang Qinsong frowned slightly, thinking of Fire Man and the two sword masters of Mount Shu. His eyes became a little gloomy. Kill him. Jiang Qinsong said coldly. Cool breeze and drifting cloud. Phantom Yin Yang. Fireman Li Tianlan. These 6 people together were indeed terrifying, but for Jiang Qinsong and Black Ghost, 2 superiors of the invincible realm, they were not unkillable enemies. Jiang Qinsong only felt that it was a little troublesome. Since he could kill Li Tianlan now, why wait for his reinforcements? Black Ghost stepped forward. Jiang Qinsong also took a step forward. In their sight, Li Tianlan glanced at them, then turned around and rushed into the castle without hesitation. Jiang Qinsong was stunned for a moment. It seemed that at the beginning of the final battle of Heaven Capital 3 years ago, Li Tianlan was no longer a nobody in the dark world. After the final battle of Heaven Capital, Li Tianlan was pushed into the divine list. After 3 years of traveling, he appeared in front of people again as a real highness. He was the commander of the Snowdance Corps, the Marshal. With such an identity and strength, few people in the entire dark world could refute him if he said that Li Tianlan was a big shot. The entire dark world was familiar with Li Tianlan. The impression that Li Tianlan left on the dark world was his unyielding character. It was the kind of unyielding determination that seemed to always press forward without fear or hesitation. He had never stepped back in his life. This impression was too deep. So when Li Tianlan turned around and fled into the castle, Jiang Qiansong froze for a moment. A young man who was not yet in the invincible realm. Facing the two invincible realm experts who joined hands to kill him at all costs. Running away was originally the most normal choice. But this choice appeared in Li Tianlan's body, which was so surprising and so not surprising. Li Tianlan did press forward. However, pressing forward with indomitable will was not stupid. Nobody would do something that would lead to death, and it would be a meaningless death. He was extremely fast. The moment he turned around, it seemed to be just one step, but he was instantly close to the remnants of the castle. Jiang Qinsong's stun time was also very short. Then he thought of the dense and endless advanced weapons in the Rekvia castle. That was also very troublesome. So looking at Li Tianlan running away, he rushed over without hesitation. Kill! A cold and determined roar sounded. In the deep night, before his voice had even fallen, the roar that filled everything had already directly pressed out from within the castle. Jiang Qinsong and Black Ghost stood close together. The 30-meter mortal world lingered around the two of them, and the whole domain was like a light shield that completely surrounded the two of them. The huge bullets poured over like a rainstorm. In the dark world, it was not easy to find a firearm that could threaten a thunder-shocking realm expert. But it was not difficult to find some powerful weapons that could threaten a thunder-shocking realm expert. The Destroyer series of weapons of Star State could be said to be the best among them. The Destroyer was not large among the weapons of the same level. Its length of nearly 20 meters was relatively easy to carry. It was not a firearm, but the latest model of rapid-fire cannon, with the special glass bullets of Star State. The cost of a Destroyer was as high as $70 million, equivalent to half of an F-35 fighter. The wealthy Rekvia family installed 10 of them in the castle at a time. What was more ironic was that these 10 destroyers were originally purchased by the Rekvia family through the arms channel of the Jianghu family of South America. The bullets were like rain. Countless bullets made of special glass kept bursting outside Jiang Qinsong's domain. In the special production, glass was still glass. Extremely brittle, but with super penetrating power. This was a bullet specially developed to deal with martial arts masters. 10 destroyers opened the rapid-fire mode and fired at the same time. Not to mention a thunder-shocking realm expert, even an invincible realm expert would be extremely embarrassed. An invincible realm expert with poor defense like Black Ghost would find it difficult to survive in it. The domain of the 30-meter mortal world kept shaking and twisting and teetering, but it always existed tenaciously in the rain of bullets. Jiang Qinsong rushed straight forward. There was no detour, no dodge, and he went forward madly against the rainstorm of bullets. In the rain of bullets, he and Black Ghost's figures were close together, and they looked extremely determined. Li Tian Lan was retreating. Jiang Qinsong and Black Ghost were chasing. The distance between the two sides was always nearly 40 meters. This distance was outside the influence of Jiang Qinsong's domain. If he spread the domain, the effect would be reduced, and the restriction on Li Tianlan was not very big. At the same time, this distance was enough to avoid the automatic tracking and search of 10 destroyers. Li Tianlan could only run now. He had a lot of chips in his hand. He also had a great chance of winning. But now he had no time. 5 minutes. In 5 minutes at most, the current situation could be reversed. Li Tianlan had to use all means to delay the time. The castle, which almost occupied several hills, was huge, and there was a lot of space for activities. Li Tianlan wanted to run. The speed of the wind and thunder veins was enough for him to keep the current distance from Jiang Qinsong for 5 minutes. So although he looked embarrassed, he was not in a hurry. It was Jiang Qinsong who should be in a hurry. Jiang Qinsong was also not in a hurry. The Jiang family of South America used to be the closest partner of the Rekvia family. So he had been to this castle many times. Although the castle was very big, he had come here many times, and he probably knew most of the terrain. Li Tianlan was waiting. Jiang Qiansong was also waiting. He was waiting for Li Tianlan to run to a real desperate situation, and then it would be the real killing blow. The terrain he needed was not far from them. As long as he turned 2 more corners ahead, he would reach a relatively narrow passage. That was where he needed to be. Running. Chasing. Fleeing. Turning. Turning again. 2 sharp turns in a row. The 10 destroyers' lock suddenly stopped for a moment. Jiang Qiansong, who had been waiting for this opportunity, suddenly opened his domain. The domain spread wildly from a distance of 30 meters. It instantly covered Li Tianlan and continued to spread forward. The domain was like a blade, instantly spreading out 100 meters. Li Tianlan looked back quickly. In his sight, Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost had changed their positions. Black Ghost in front. Jiang Qiansong was behind him. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly shook. He suddenly found that the territory that Jiang Qiansong had spread out had been separated from him, but was connected to Black Ghost. Black Ghost raised the knife in his hand. The saber light was as black as ink. At this moment, Black Ghost and Jiang Qiansong's breaths were connected. Black Ghost's knife was as long as Jiang Qiansong's domain was. 30-meter mortal world crossing the sea by deception. In the 30-meter mortal world, one could borrow the power of others and use it for oneself. He could also lend his strength to others to deceive them. Jiang Qiansong's domain, which had spread to 100 meters, posed no threat to Li Tianlan. But Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost's breath were connected, and Black Ghost's 100-meter-long knife light was the last thing Li Tianlan wanted to face. Without a doubt, this was the real killing blow. It was a sure kill strike. Chapter 435. This was the first time in Li Tianlan's life that he had clearly smelled death. More than 3 years ago, he had died once in Heaven Capital. But at that time, the sword of the woman in white was too fast, like a flash of flowing light. The moment the light lit up, with the sword intent exploding all over the sky, the blade had pierced his heart. Because it was too fast, there was no way to react. Black Ghost's knife was also very fast. But more of it was indescribable madness and barbarism. Li Tianlan had seen such a knife for the first time. Or it was the first time he had seen such a domain. The knife light and the domain were completely integrated, and the ultimate essence was the power to destroy everything. Such power, in Li Tianlan's view, was infinitely close to perfection. People in the dark world knew that Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost were a perfect combination. Even if it was not absolutely perfect, at least it was infinitely close. At the moment of life and death, Li Tianlan's eyes flashed a thoughtful color. He could no longer see Black Ghost or Jiang Qiansong. The obscure light of the 30-meter mortal world combined with the dark knife light. In the long and narrow space of the castle, there was a darkness far thicker and deeper than the night. The darkness covered the entire passage and began to rotate with the crazy killing intent. Crack, boom. In the loud noise of the collapse of the sky and the cracking of the earth, as the darkness began to rotate, the castle in the area of hundreds of meters suddenly exploded in the knife light. The 3 nearby destroyers were completely extinguished at the first time. The slightly inexperienced darkness flowed and rotated in the space, faster and faster. The extremely condensed killing intent locked on Li Tianlan. In Li Tianlan's sight, the long and narrow passage disappeared completely in an instant. The sound of the castle exploding in the area of hundreds of meters rumbled. Gravel collapsed, blood splashed, smoke and dust rose. The darkness in the empty castle was rotating, and a madly rotating vortex appeared between heaven and earth. The vortex roared and rotated, swallowing everything, covering the dark night sky, and suppressing the entire castle from top to bottom. Li Tianlan had no space to dodge at all. He couldn't tell whether it was knife light or the domain. It could only be called power. The domain and the knife light blended together, which was the combination of defense and attack. This madly rotating vortex was a millstone that was enough to obliterate everything in a second, and it could change into an unbreakable wall at any time in the next second. Li Tianlan had no possibility to avoid Black Ghost's knife. Defense and attack were the two sides of light and darkness. This power was so subtle and grand, like reality and illusion. However, being infinitely close to perfection was still not true perfection. The saber light brought with it the might of heaven and earth as it descended. It was like an undercurrent that could devour everything. The undercurrent was filled with incomparably fierce hurricanes. The silver sword gleam lit up in the black tide that was surging with hurricanes. Blood gushed out of Li Tianlan's body almost in an instant. But the blade of falling stars was still stable. The sword light was still bright. There was wind everywhere in the black tide. Every wisp of wind was a fatal edge. Li Tianlan raised falling stars. Sea splitter. Punishing heaven form. Shattering form. Space-rending stance. The mountains and rivers were silent forever. Shadow formula. Desperate pursuit. All the unique skills burst out from Li Tianlan in an instant. Black tide, he thrust his sword forward. But it wasn't an attack. Instead, it was avoidance. Using every means possible to evade. At this moment, Black Ghost's breath was connected with Jiang Qinsong's, and his strength was enough to rank in the top 10 on the divine list. For Li Tianlan, this was an invincible opponent. He was no match for Black Ghost. But this did not mean that he would definitely die in this blow. No one understood his martial arts. Except for himself. All-embracing collection. The changed 24 moves of sword was ethereal and fierce. This was the unique skill of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, but in Li Tianlan's eyes, it was the 24 moves of sword. A move that simulated sword intent. There were more and more unique skills in the black tide. Wherever the silver edge passed, the sword intent flew and spread, and was finally carved in every corner of the black tide. Sword intent of Mount Shu. Sword intent of Jade Pool. Sword intent of Jifeng Sword Training School. The knife of Wuji Palace. There were even several styles of Sword of Emperor Path and Sword of King Path in the Wang family of Beihai. A light and shadow appeared in front of Li Tianlan. The light and shadow rotated around him and suddenly turned into a sword wheel. This was the 8th supreme sword dance of Kunlun City. Countless unique skills were simulated by him. There was no doubt that the simulated sword intent that was constantly carved in the black tide was not really elite. But each move was full of charm. Jiang Qinsong, who was always less than 2 meters away from Black Ghost, frowned slightly. He suddenly felt that this scene seemed a little familiar. As if he had seen it somewhere. Where had he seen it? While thinking, the black tide was surging. Li Tianlan's silver sword light went straight forward. The black tide that pervaded everything pressed down overwhelmingly. The killing intent was endless. Li Tianlan finally carved the last sword intent in the black tide. This sword intent was not a simulation. It was his own unique skill. Whether it was the essence or the abyss, it was perfect. The forever silent world. In the silent nothingness, Li Tianlan once again started with the forever silent world and raised the sword edge in his hand. The falling stars burst out the light that pierced the black tide in an instant. Jiang Qinsong finally remembered where he had seen this move. That was many years ago. On the border between Zhongzhou State and Annan State. On the battlefield of the treason case. He opened his mouth, but he didn't have time to speak. He started with the forever silent world. 21st blade shatter of land. In the 24 moves of sword, it was known as the absolute sword that broke the domain of the world. With this sword as the core, the sword intent that Li Tianlan had just simulated suddenly burst out and spread. The whole black tide twisted wildly. There was no loud noise on the twisted battlefield. But the constant collision of swords and knives resounded densely between heaven and earth. No one in the castle could intervene in this battle. Even cool breeze and drifting cloud couldn't get close to the battlefield. This was a real fight to the death. A battle that belonged only to Li Tianlan. The collision of gold and iron kept ringing. Some weak-willed elites in the castle vomited blood and fainted on the spot in the harsh friction and collision sound. The collision sound became more and more intense. The sound came out of the domain, which meant that the domain had begun to loosen. The black tide began to condense in the loosening. Innumerable darkness spread out and eventually disappeared. But a small amount of darkness condensed and turned into an incomparably deep knife. Black Ghost swept his knife. A dark knife shadow of tens of meters long appeared between heaven and earth. The moment the knife shadow appeared, it had begun to collapse. But Li Tianlan, who still maintained the action of drawing the sword, was shocked. His whole body flew out directly and fell hard in a ruin dozens of meters away. His figure moved, and his face became extremely pale in an instant. Blood gushed out from all over his body. Every corner of Li Tianlan's body was covered with knife wounds. Especially in his abdomen and back, 2 shocking knife wounds almost completely tore his body apart. Blood gushed out of the knife, and the bones inside his body could be vaguely seen. The most important thing was that with the massive blood loss in his body, the natural healing effect of the potion was weakening. The serious injury he suffered in the battle with Jiang Qianyan not long ago was about to break out completely. In a worsening situation, Li Tianlan chuckled. But Jiang Qinsong's face grew gloomier. The move just now was enough to kill Li Tianlan, but in the end, it only left him with a serious injury. There were too many problems in it. His breath was connected with Jiang Qinsong's. The absolute balance of defense and offense was infinitely close to perfection. Li Tianlan didn't die under such a move. This could only mean that the level of the opponent's sword intent was still above their joint attack. Wasn't it the real perfection that was infinitely close to perfection? Or rather, the real chosen one? The corner of Jiang Qinsong's mouth twitched. He opened his mouth and said, "Kill, who do you want to kill?" A clear and peaceful voice suddenly interrupted Jiang Qinsong's words. He spoke in perfect Chinese. Jiang Qinsong's pupils contracted instantly, and he suddenly turned around. A little sharp sword light appeared in his sight. There was only a little sword light. But the sword energy was overwhelming in an instant. In Jiang Qinsong's eyes, there was only the tip of the sword shining with sword light. This was a sword that completely turned all the power into sword intent. Wherever the sword light passed, there was only sharpness. Jiang Qinsong recognized this section of the sword edge in an instant. This was a famous sword that was famous throughout the dark world. Its fame was not inferior to listen to the sea in the hands of the sword emperor of Zhongzhou state. Famous sword, sharpness. Recognizing this sword, Jiang Qinsong naturally recognized the owner of this sword. Qin Shilai. An indescribable feeling welled up in Jiang Qinsong's heart. His expression suddenly twisted, and he gnashed his teeth and uttered a name that was enough to shock Eastern Europe. Qin Shilai. Dark Sword Master of Eastern Europe. He was the younger brother of Qin Dongqiao, the patriarch of the Qin clan in Eastern Europe. He ranked first on the holy list of the dark world. He was indeed not on the divine list. Because Li Tianlan was still on the divine list. It's 11:59 p.m. New Year's Eve. Spring Festival is coming soon. So I wish everyone a Happy New Year's Eve. Happy New Year. Last minute notice, I'll be taking leave for the next 2 days. I'll be visiting a lot of relatives and even staying in my hometown, so I really can't write anymore. I should be able to resume updating on the 3rd day of Chinese New Year. I want to say a lot of things, to explain and to feel emotional, but I don't have enough words. If I write more, I'll have to spend more money. That was all for now. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.